From beyond the farthest reaches of our galaxy they come. Two brains pulsing with a strange energy. These space brains come to share their love of science fiction movies.
Welcome to Spacebrains, the show where we joy watch sci-fi movies and tell you what was good and what was great. I'm Surrey and this is Mark.
Hiya. Tonight we're talking about Interstellar. It's the 2014 film directed by Christopher Nolan. So if you haven't caught it yet, what do you need to do, Surrey?
Well, this is your spoiler warning. You better go back and watch it. It's available on your favourite streaming services, or you can get it from Google Play, or you must be able to get it on DVD somewhere, I suppose. 2014's so long ago now that it must have come out in DVD.
Yeah, if you're still watching DVDs, good for you. And you can probably order it online because we're all stuck indoors and it will get hand-delivered to you in about 14 weeks. And that will be a fantastic way to watch it.
14 weeks.
Tune back into Space Brains once you've watched it. If you haven't watched it, like me, I had not seen it before we picked it for tonight. So, Surrey, what was your number one takeaway from Interstellar?
Number one takeaway is something that I hadn't really considered before, is that a wormhole would actually appear as a sphere in space.
Yeah, I liked that. I thought you would like that.
I hadn't really considered that, and it makes a lot of sense when you think about it. But always it's displayed as sort of like a funnel into which everything goes. But yes, this idea that it would appear as a sphere because from every angle you'd be seeing through this hole. So it's a hole that you're looking at in 3 dimensions, as the guy says in the movie, and that would be a sphere. And then as you try to go through it, you wouldn't be going into it like a funnel. You would it would look like it does in the movie there, where you'd look like you would be approaching this thing coming up on the side, like you're going around it.
Yeah.
So that was pretty good. I did appreciate that.
I liked how they did this. The guy that explained it. I can't remember his name, but I liked how he did. He goes, yeah, they normally explain it like this, and he did the bit of paper folding and the pencil through it, and it really made me think like how many films you and I have watched, and also how many science fiction films where they do that. They go, to go through a wormhole. It folds space and time, and they do the pencil. In fact, they did it in Event Horizon, didn't they? That was the recent film that you and I reviewed, and they did it in that movie. Sam Neill does it. You know, do you remember that? Yeah,
I mean, every movie that ever wants to explain a wormhole or some kind of hyperspace travel does the pencil through
2 bits of paper. Yeah, and I loved how he kind of went, this is the way they normally show you. But when you think about it, it would be a sphere. It's like, I loved that explanation. It was a real little dig at all of those other films that have always done that. And then them sort of saying, this is more of the modern day science behind it, and I really liked that idea. And it was cool when in the movie they approached it and they saw it through the cockpit, didn't they? They were staring at it off in the distance, and because he had problems with the motion sickness, he actually said, can we stop spinning? And they stopped the spaceship spinning. And there was a moment there where they both kind of looked through that cockpit window and you could see it. And the shape was there, wasn't it? It was a different type of
it looked like
shape.
A little shiny marble.
Yeah.
It looked small, but I did like that when they approached it was actually really quite big.
Yeah. Yeah, and it would be. I mean, it'd be freaking massive, wouldn't it, to be honest? I mean, it could be any size, of course, but I think...
Well, it would want to be. Like, if you're going to be a helpful fifth dimensional energy being opening up a wormhole, you'd want to make it big enough to be useful.
That's right.
Trying to make a little pinprick through which to thread your needle seems a little bit tough. I mean, why not make it big? You may as well.
Go big. Big is always better. Come on, people. Yeah, well, that's an interesting takeaway. I like that.
And for you then, was this a movie of hope, a warning, or an experiment?
I reckon it is hope. And it takes a long time to get there, pretty much the end of the film. But I think it is actually hope. It's a film that kind of, the story is bred out of, humans ruining the planet again through, we don't exactly know. I don't know about you at the start, and we'll get into the plot in a few moments, but I don't know about you, but I was kind of a bit confused in that first 10 minutes, not getting any sort of content. Like, they kind of kept leaning towards things, didn't they? I wasn't sure if there'd been a massive war. I wasn't sure if, it was just that we had abused the planet too much. I wasn't sure if, I was very unsure
really quite
about
liked
what happened.
it. I quite liked it was like a gentle apocalypse.
Yeah.
Rather than having this, World War III, Mad Max, zombies take over, mass paranoia sort of thing. It was like maybe some of that had sort of happened a little bit. We don't really know. But it was just this kind of gentle apocalypse where we could tell things were winding down.
Yeah.
Everything was dusty for starters because of this dust, and the machines, they had all old cars and stuff. Like, you imagine that the really fancy technology had stopped being manufactured, maybe.
Yeah, which it probably had, yeah.
And there was a whole process where they're chasing after that drone to get a hold of the solar panels.
Yeah.
And so you got this idea that the world was winding down. It wasn't a big poof and bang and it's all gone. It's just like kind of grinding to a halt. And the textbooks are saying the Apollo landings were faked. And you can see the political reason for that was because they didn't want people looking to the stars when they needed to concentrate on what's going on here. And NASA is having to be in total secrecy because it's just not popular to explore space anymore.
No, you can't waste. Well, like he literally says that, doesn't he? The Michael Caine character says, you can't be funding space travel when there's not enough food. Like when you can't feed people. So, and I agree. I liked that, and it makes you think of, like even again the world we're living in right now, that we are having such a upside down society across the globe right now with the coronavirus. And, of course things could get much worse for Australian society and other societies, if we just let people die and we didn't try to treat people, or we just let, we just sort of said, hey, it's business as usual, and everyone went about their day. And then all of a sudden you had like 30,000 people needing hospital. Like it would end up allowing society to go that way. You would end up with maybe a civil revolt or, really heavy conflict in a country like Australia, because there wouldn't be enough beds, there wouldn't be enough hospital, wouldn't be enough treatment, and people would turn on each other. Whereas kind of the government's here making us, bunker down and, work from home and these sort of support mechanisms. The whole point of that is to stop society turning on itself, isn't it? So I agree with you. I liked that there was these suggestions that some point in the past stuff had happened, maybe food had run out, maybe society wasn't as wealthy as it was. Like
Coop had made the comment that back in his day they'd been fighting for food.
Yeah. Whereas now they had enough food to kind of just, you could see society was, like when he goes to the school to meet the principal and the teacher, like you can see that society, they're trying to function as an education system, but they're probably not quite the same power that education has, like, in our current society. So it's kind of like, those they always, you always talk about in a society, those institutions like law and order, education, politics, religion. And like, once those pillars crumble a bit, then society struggles, doesn't it? And of course it can go down the level of heavy violence and all those kind of things. So you could see that the society was a bit edgy and they were doing the best they could, but it wasn't the flourishing society that we see today. But it did make me, maybe we talked about it with our last film, The Thing, but maybe it's just because it's on my consciousness. But definitely at that start of Interstellar, I was thinking about the world we're living in right now and how, like a few wrong decisions by governments or a few of the, things didn't quite go, or if things were more severe, like you had this virus, suddenly the fatality rate was much higher, like 30 or 40%. Like all of a sudden, society
at the moment,
could be like this, couldn't it?
At the moment, we're sort of talking about a 2% rate.
Look how severe that is.
If that was like a 10%,
yeah,
that it doesn't sound, you still like 90% are okay, but that masks the big problem then that you think in your own life, 1 in 10 people will be gone.
Yeah.
And so, there's 5 people in my the Hughes family.
Yeah.
And then there's 4 people in my immediate, my wife and my kids. And then there's 5 people in her family. So there's there's 14 people. 1 or 2 people are going to be not there anymore.
Yep.
And you look at that in Interstellar there where Coop's wife had died of a brain cancer. And he makes the point that if, it's one of these dumb machines that we didn't have working was an MRI, which would have detected the tumor and they could have just, cured her. It was a curable thing, but they didn't know until it was an autopsy.
Yeah.
They discovered what was happening and then, we could have cured that.
Yeah.
That's the sort of that human element that gets glossed over a bit when you're talking statistics or if the apocalypse is too dramatic.
Yes.
So if you've got one of these dramatic apocalypses where, a comet hits the Earth and causes a darkness for 50 years, and out of that comes the remaining 10,000 humans
a new society
spread across the world. It's just become such a massive number and such a huge upheaval that the tragedy of that is lost. But when you're looking at these things where you're talking about families losing 1 or 2 people here or there from easily preventable things just because of a lack of resources or a lack of machines in this case. It brings that it brings it a lot closer to home, I think.
Yeah, it does. It makes it very, I suppose that's the thing. That's what I'm meaning, that it connects to, I know this movie was 2014, 6 years ago, but me watching it now, I could see connection. We even did have our premier here in WA kind of saying, we need to protect our resources because, you are only a few steps away from anarchy and an apocalyptic society. If, for example, like you just said, if it's suddenly a 10% death rate, fatality rate, well, you can think about all the workers in our society. Now, you and I are working from home, but there's certain people that need to go out there, like people at the water corporation. And if you have 1 in 10 people, like you think about those engineers, you think about those water meter fixer, meter fixer, which was a job that my dad did. If that guy dies, you don't necessarily have the talent to always automatically replace it. Or think about power poles. You have teams of crews of, electricians and guys that work on the power poles. And what happens if, that might be a team of 10 people, you take out 1 of them. But in a mass society, that means every team of those guys that fix power poles when there's power outages, lightning strikes, anything, which is still going to happen during this virus outbreak. If you suddenly take out that expertise through a fatality of a virus, you're suddenly, you don't have the people that are skilled to operate all of these functions that make society kind of livable, do you? And then all of it, that's all it takes. Like, it just takes a few of those people to be knocked out, that the next thing you know, you do have full-blown anarchy or sort of more of an apocalyptic state happening, don't you, So you've got to be a bit careful.
At work we had the situation where a critical project was delayed by nearly 6 months because there were only, I think, 2 or maybe 3 people in all of Australia with the knowledge of how to set up this particular telemetry system that reads from power generators and allows for control networks. Like there's only a couple of people in Australia who are able to do that.
Yes.
And they were busy doing something else.
Yeah.
So the option was, try and find someone somewhere else in the world able to do it, of which there's still not many, and they're mostly busy, or just wait 6 months.
Yep.
Turned out we had to just wait.
Yeah.
And as you say, it could even just be in this Dust Bowl situation, in this movie, their communications and transport networks seem to be quite compromised. People have got cars and things, but you don't get the impression that people are just sort of jetting about the place left and right. There was no aeroplanes shown in the sky. No one flew out to get Coop, even though he was like a great pilot. Because maybe they didn't even know he lived nearby.
Yeah.
Until he turned up at NASA and they went, "Oh, Jesus, yeah, we'll use you."
Yeah,
so you could imagine then.
It seemed a surprise that he was still alive, which I didn't quite get that again. But I guess like you're just saying that now that you're saying it that way, and they weren't on mobile phones, were they? And they weren't on the internet and laptops and computers. We didn't really see that, did we?
There was none, and they had GPS run sort of robot harvesters, but they didn't have. They knew about drones, but they didn't have any on their own operating.
No.
Which you would have thought they'd have. They'd just like send the drones out and have a look at stuff, but they didn't have that.
Yeah, and it did seem with those harvesters, maybe. I mean, I kind of got the impression that might have been because Cooper was, like this was his thing. That was his expertise. That was something that, again, it'd be like someone like yourself, even Surrey. Like I could imagine you in the apocalypse having little robots running around after you and cleaning up things, but
not
everyone that
computers.
survives the apocalypse has that. You're the robot guy in the apocalypse, whereas the rest of us are like down on our knees scrubbing the ground. Like there's always someone in the apocalypse that's, they knew how to code things and they knew how to make robotics and, they survive and they actually build robots even in a... Because that sort of was what I got from even the impression, because with the drone, he was kind of like, we'll take the solar cells, but it was almost like, I can rip this apart because there's parts in here that we can use for different things,
Yeah, he took the whole lot. He didn't just take the solar panel, the wings off.
Yeah, it was I mean, we'll get into that in a moment, so we'll come back to, but anyway, I think hope, because here we have this weird post society breakdown. I don't think apocalypse is probably the right word, and the world is, it is broken. It's not the society we know and love today, and there's, like this key, you can see these key pillars of society broken. The environment seems to be much harsher. Also the dealings that like they have to be farmers. Obviously Cooper is, and he kind of pretty quickly shows us he's not just a farmer. And he wants his children to not necessarily be farmers, but that's the way society has to be. And then, through his journey throughout the film, I think there's a lot of hope, because he's a ray of hope for NASA, because he is a pilot that's been in space, or the stratosphere, as he says. And then on top of that, then the whole film, he's kind of hopeful to get back to his daughter, isn't he? He wants to get back. Very primal. I liked that primal part of this story, that really at the end of the day, again, it goes back to that Blake Schneider caveman story idea that, it was a father and a daughter, wasn't it? It was a father wanting his daughter back, He wanted to get back to his daughter.
I think that was the allusion to wanting humanity back.
Yeah,
to
I
some
think so
sort of
too. Yeah,
level of he keeps talking about we're pioneers, we're explorers, we should be out there, getting amongst the stars.
Yeah, and I mean, there's hope. I think that the realization of this film, the climax of this film, is that they kept talking about these other beings, and him realizing that they're not other beings, they are human beings that are maybe from the future, and they've sent this information back to us to enable humanity to actually survive. And so to me it seems like, and even when he does make it back to his daughter, she's very much like, look, I've got family, nice to see you, Dad, but on you go. And it's like, and he wants at the end, like what you just said, he wants to kind of, I don't want to look at the past, I want to kind of keep searching forward. And again, I see this time, it's a very, if you and I are going to write a science fiction film one day, Surrey, you can see that science fiction, I think a lot of the time, it does, no matter what, this question, we say hope, warning, and experiment. And definitely some films lean into one of these. But I think a lot of the time in science fiction that's based in the future, there's this constant question about what does humanity survive? And look, some sci-fi suggests no, it doesn't, like robots rule the world or whatever. But I think also it quite often sci-fi is, no matter what is thrown at human beings, we tend to find a way, don't we? We tend to get out there. And if you remember in this film, Matt Damon, Dr. Mann, he actually even says that to Cooper when he's about to kill him. He says, you can't, before that scene, he's leading him off into the wilderness kind of on that planet, that he actually says, you can't send a robot out here because they don't have fear of death. And it's that fear of death.
They don't have that.
Sorry?
The instinct to survive. They don't have the survival instinct.
Yeah, they don't have the survival instinct. They said they will make decisions based on numbers and the situation, which might be far superior than a human, but they don't have that survival instinct, And it's interesting, isn't it? And I think this film really brings it back to hope. There's definitely warnings in here, and you could see it as an experiment, all this sort of stuff. But yeah, I felt at the end hopeful for humanity again.
I think it was hope also because it was, at the end of it, it's that strength of human courage, if you like, or emotion, or that human nature that they were depending on to win.
Yeah.
They weren't, they're looking for this, to try and complete this equation. They were looking to try and use their resources efficiently and make use of a wormhole and so forth. But at the end of it, as that revelation was that there really is this connection. It is that connection that people have with each other, which allows them to find solutions. Yeah. So let's get into this.
Are we right? Let us know. Hit us up on the socials. Let us know if we're right. What do you think? Hope, warning, or experiment? So what have you been up to anyway? Sorry, really quickly, before we get into this massive 3-hour plot.
Quick.
What have you been up to?
I've been...
Anything.
I'm
quickly
programming a computer game.
Yeah?
I should be doing more writing. I am writing a short story, which is a retelling of Hansel and Gretel. But it's a bit more horrific.
Right, okay. Have you ever read just on that, have you ever read the Brothers Grimm version of Hansel and Gretel?
Not the original, no.
You got it. I've
read
got it.
synopses.
I've got, I don't dare say it's not the exact original, but I've actually got this book. Tanya, my wife, gave it to me many, many years ago. It's great. It's about 1,000 pages, like a dictionary book, and it's the Brothers Grimm. And in there is Hansel and Gretel, like that Brothers Grimm version, the German version. And it's pretty brutal. It's quite different to the Disney version. So,
well, yeah, this short story I'm doing, I'm a real fan of retelling, and that's because I think that if a story has already been told and is popular, then it's there's something to it that is worthy of knowing.
Yeah.
And in retelling, you get to pick out different aspects and sort of look at them. So yeah, it's a retelling of Hansel and Gretel. It's set in a modern setting, and there's a bit of a character inversion where the witch is actually sort of a kindly person, and Hansel and Gretel are not kindly people. And yeah, I'll see how it develops exactly, but it's a bit more of a horror story than it is a story of hope or redemption or pleasantry.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like the Red Riding Hood, how, like there's that, they've made an adult version. I know there was a film probably about almost 10 years ago. I think that was just Red Riding Hood with that Amanda, I'm sure that Amanda Seyfried's in it or something as an actress from Mean Girls. Not sci-fi at all, but yeah. I haven't actually seen that particular film. But there's also a Red Riding Hood version that's probably a little bit better than that film. Is it called Red or something? And I'm sure Winona Ryder's in it. It's about 2000, and I'd have to sort of get on the IMDb thing, but it's kind of like set in the modern world. And, like they're drug addicts, and the wolf is like the drug dealer, and that kind of, it's like a real analogy of the Red Riding Hood story. And I remember watching that. It's a real little indie film. Yeah, I'll have to get the title of that. But, yeah, like it's cool, like that reimagining sometimes of old stories, definitely.
Yeah, so that's what I've been doing. And how about yourself? You've been trying to find time to write?
Trying to find time. I'm squeezing in a little bit of writing, but the world we're in now has kind of limited it very tinily. I'm going to, I think you and I have talked about this previously as well. Tanya and I are both doing it, which is trying to sort of get up that hour earlier again. We're trying to kick that in. I don't know why. I don't know if your kids are like this, but you set your alarm clock. You go, okay, this week we'll set it for 6. And then later in the week, we'll set it for 5:30. You set it for 6, the kids get up at 5 to 6. You set it for 5:30, they get up at 5:15. You set it for 5, they get up at 4:30. I don't know if your kids have ever done that, but our kids seem to just have this knack, the day. Or it's even the same, like, we've had like when I went and shot my film last November, it's going to be a massive day. Can everyone... I'm not saying it to the kids, but can everyone just sleep in a little bit? I'll get up at 8 o'clock in the morning. It's going to be this huge 12-hour day for Daddy. I want to have all my juices firing. And then they're up in the middle of the night, Whereas every other night that week they weren't, Anyway, I'm complaining here, so I shouldn't complain. They seem to have a real knack. Tanya was the same when she made her docos. Every time she had a shoot, Mabel was up in the middle of the night before the shoot. Like, absolutely bizarre, eh? There's some sort of... law of attraction going on there in a really negative way.
Yeah, vibe is being picked up on. I've done that when I've had to go start work early, so I've got to go up at 5:30.
Yeah.
And I'll get up, so I pull myself out of bed at 5:30, tiptoe, and there's like my kids sitting out there already. Like, Are you kidding me? I don't have time for this.
Yep.
You gonna make me breakfast? Get back to... I've forced them back into bed of that situation. Just get back into bed now. You're not getting up until Mum gets up. That was when they were younger and they'd actually still listen to me.
Yeah, I know. See, the thing, I will say that the thing is, if Walt was like that or Tate was like that in my house, they're a little bit older, you could just go, do you know what? Stuff it. Watch some TV. I don't care. It's not what I normally do, but today's a special day. Just watch some morning TV. It's not what we normally allow them to do in the morning, but just bugger it, do it, so that Daddy can go get ready or do his thing. But then Mabel, she's just too young for that, so you got to, give her a bottle, get her some breakfast, change a nappy. You just got to do that whole schmozzle with her. So, but both of us are trying to do it for a bit of creative sanity. It did work today. Kids did get up, like they were up when we were up. But I managed to put on the headphones, did some writing. Mabel just sat next to me. She had her bottle, and I just typed away. So I kind of just pushed through it, But so I'm hopeful.
I sat here and had to explain to Elliot the work I was doing. So I explained to him about what web services were and how I had to redefine this new one and the new version. And I explained to him how... And I don't know how much of he actually recognised or realised, but eventually he kind of nodded and stood up and walked out. So I think he came to the conclusion, Daddy does boring work.
I'm not actually interested in Daddy's work anymore. I'll move on from that. But I will say, it takes me back, we've talked about this as a writing resource for writers out there. The Stephen King on writing, he talks about, he was a teacher by day. He had to do all of those, high school teacher, he had to do all that high school stuff. Coming home to a wife and 2 little kids, so he'd have to do all that, get them to bed. And in fact, it was his wife that made him, at night time, on the porch. They used to have a little caravan. They were living in a trailer park at this point in time. He's a teacher. And he used to sit out on the porch like 11 p.m. at night. She would do washing and come, because she was also a writer. She used to do poetry, his wife. And and she would come out and check on his writing, and he's writing out there on the porch. And that's how he wrote his first book, Carrie, was literally just like on the porch, nighttime, after being at work all day long, coming home, dealing with a wife and kids that are stressed out in a tiny little caravan. So I always think about that and go, well, you just have to find those moments, don't you? You just have to, and it's what Tanya and I talk about a lot. Do you know what? If we get up at 5 a.m., the kids might be up at 5 a.m., and we just have to serve them breakfast and then write. This is the world we live in,
Yes.
So anyway, we will move on. That's my spiel.
We'll move on. It's just...
This film, Interstellar, we've mentioned 2014. It is basically the little blurb, that I got off IMDb. I quite liked, because I started to tell Tanya the story of this, and it was going to take me half an hour, and I thought, I'm not saying it right. But the little blurb on IMDb, I really like. It says, a team of explorers travel through a wormhole in space in an attempt to ensure humanity's survival. That is a lean, mean logline, isn't it? So it's written by Jonathan Nolan and Christopher Nolan, and of course directed by Christopher Nolan. I'm sure when this film came out, I had probably a near 2-year-old baby with another one on its way. And this is part of the reason why I never saw this film. And another reason then over the last 5 years is because it goes for almost 3 hours with little babies. I never have 3 hours to watch a movie by myself. I mean, God almighty. I struggled to do it this time, and that's like when I've booked it in for us to do this podcast. Yeah. And apparently this film in particular was based on a little short story and also a science idea from the writers of Contact, the science fiction, the 1997 science fiction film. We should do that one day, Surrey, maybe as a classic. That is quite a good film, Contact.
The writers of that... You want to get me shouting...
Yeah, the writers
I'll start shouting about that one.
Yeah, the sound, listening to the sound. The sound is really good. It's a really good movie for sound, that film. And poor Jodie Foster having to defend herself at the end when no one believes her. But anyway, they took that idea and I think it's Warner Brothers. I read a bit about this earlier today. Warner Brothers had it, and they needed a writer, and Jonathan Nolan was kind of suggested. Steven Spielberg was part of the project. Jonathan Nolan then spent 4 years writing a script, and then he was wanting to shift the script. He didn't want to shift it. Sorry, he was selling the script. They were interested in it, and he suggested his brother. And his brother said, "Sure, but I want to do some writing on the script." These two have written films together before, so I find that quite interesting. So. Obviously, good old Christopher Nolan's come aboard and go, yeah, I like your script, but I think we need to make some changes. That would be an interesting meeting to sit in on, wouldn't it? Those brothers and how they work.
Well, there's a bit of a surprise. Next episode, I've got Jonathan and Christopher in the studio.
Do you now?
No. They've had to cancel last minute, I'm afraid. All the flights in and out of Australia have been cancelled. It's a real shame.
Bummer. You can't get them on a Zoom call or anything?
No, it's all over now.
Bummer. I thought you were going to say, I have Christopher Nolan on the phone with a K and Josephine Nolan on the phone
I don't even know.
And they can give us our
I know a
opinion
guy called Nolan.
Interstellar.
So Interstellar, it starts off with almost like a documentary style. So there's like an old woman that says, "Oh, my dad was a farmer," like I guess they all were at the time.
Yep.
And it cuts in and out to, is it Cooper is trying to pilot something up into the stratosphere, and then there's like something's going wrong, and then it cuts back and shows corn crops or something, and talks about the blight. It's kind of chops around a bit and dumps you out.
Sorry, just to cut you there, because I think you talked about this so well when we did Serenity, and it reminded me a bit of Serenity, the opening couple of minutes of this, because if you remember, it's like we see a bit of a documentary. We then cut to Matthew McConaughey playing Cooper, kind of having, like navigating this plane crashing. Then he wakes up, and then his daughter's pulled us in about a ghost. So you remember Serenity, it's kind of like we're in a memory, and then a memory, and then a hologram, and then we're in like the ship. You remember that? Like, and it reminded me, I don't think it was done this, it wasn't exactly the same, but it just kind of reminded me of that. It's like we were seeing one world, the documentary, and then we kind of went into the world of the crash, and then we're in the world of the girl's bedroom. It was sort of like that real quick. We had 3 quick things in a row.
There was a lot of information being thrown at us all at once. Yeah. We're sort of dumped out into this world now where there's a farmstead, and they're in corn crops.
And they talk about the dust.
There's the dust, and we hear about that they had to have the plates set on the table upside down, and we see them doing all these sorts of things with it, and don't really know what's going on, except you're getting a lot of information there, which is quite a good way of doing it. It sort of eases you in, almost like you're coming in from a documentary, but as you said, that's overlaid with almost like a dramatization then, and then it merges just into this dramatization of the story as it happened.
And I do think, I don't know if you thought about this when you saw it, but the way that doco and they kind of come back to it with the lady and the man talking, because they kind of show that a couple of times, and then, obviously at the end it comes back around again, but in this opening sequence, you see it a couple of times. It really reminded me of, I'm sure I saw a couple of documentaries in history class in high school, those really boring ones about the Great Depression in America. And later in the film, there's a scene where they have all the old-fashioned farming utes and people leaving town all bunkered up, and the couple of kids are on the back of one ute, looking depressed and starving.
On the couch that's been chucked on there, like
it was very
Hillbillies.
not like 2020, was it? And I believe this film, the idea is this film, it's like 2060 or something. Not that it ever says it to us. Yeah, I think online it says it's supposed to be 2067, but it's not like they ever tell us the year. But it distinctly looked like those wagons from the 1920s of the Great Depression, especially in like rural America,
Yeah, well, they took a lot of the imagery from the Dust Bowl of... In fact, I was just looking here, it says the Dust Bowl phenomenon of the 1930s, as documented by Ken Burns in The Dust Bowl.
Ah, good old Ken Burns, documentary maker. Oh, Surrey, yes. That's what I probably said. It's probably from one of his docos, I'm thinking. So we're introduced to Cooper. He's like a father figure, and he's got a daughter, Merv, and a son, Tom, and there's also good old Grandpa, who, to me, if you put John Lithgow in a movie, I'm pretty bloody happy, Surrey. Like, I like this guy. Raising Cain, 30 Rock from the Sun. This dude, like, he's been in some different types of roles over the years, but I'm a bit of a fan. I like this guy, and he kind of just plays. He again, I think, like you've just said, like them doing a lot of the imagery of the Dust Bowl. Someone like John Lithgow, for some reason, he kind of he must be a bit iconic of that kind of old school American in my mind, anyway. And maybe Christopher Nolan's, I'm not too sure. But you go a farmer, an old school American farmer, and you put John Lithgow there. I'm like, yeah, that's an old school farmer.
Yeah, he played well there. He was the father-in-law, as far as I could tell. He'd been living with him. Sort of had he was almost like a mentor figure.
He was, wasn't he? Yeah.
Or what do you want to call it? Like, yeah, sort of not necessarily a mentor, but he was the spiritual advisor.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
Because Cooper obviously had troubles with losing his wife, and I know that Cooper's daughters. Parents weren't there at all, so he sort of had this older figure who gave him guidance.
We learn this quickly because then, pretty much after this, there's this weird moment, this Navy drone thing flies overhead, and instead of them, well, in fact, yeah, they got a flat tire, didn't they? And they were going to like fix this flat tire, and then all of a sudden this drone flies overhead, and you kind of like, in my mind, I'm like, oh wow, okay, this is a bit interesting, and then. They get into the ute, and he just fangs it through the cornfield, doesn't he? And he's like chasing it, hunting it, and he's got a special gun that he gets Merv to hold that. He gets Tom to actually drive the car, and he's on a laptop kind of tapping away, and he's telling us a lot about the drone as they're chasing it, and they're just barreling him through a cornfield, aren't they?
Yeah, and through a fence. And
I love it.
Off towards a thing. It confused me at first and what it was they were trying to do, because you see that drone has clearly looked like it was a serious drone.
It was, yeah, it's a military drone.
Mentioning it was Chinese, it would have been like solar powered, had been circling for at least 10 years, from which again is sort of that hint that there was some sort of conflict. But it had just been circling for no good reason.
Yeah.
And they said, well, why did it come down low? Perhaps it had picked up some sort of a signal. And it's not really confirmed what it was, whether it was because it was picking up something from NASA or because these gravity wave distortions were causing troubles with it. But yeah, he gets control of it and lands it and just sort of strips it. And the next thing we see, it's on the back of his truck, and they're pulling him into school
and the
for
one thing I think
parent-teacher.
before that, I mean, I'm not sure if it's probably not the saving the cat, but No, it's not a saving the cat moment, but we definitely learn a lot about Cooper because he shows Merv like how to land it. He like lands it really gently, doesn't he? You know, like once he took control of it through his laptop thing, he kind of like gets her to land, and it's like quite a tender moment. And she actually says to him, "Why don't we let it go? Like it's like an animal, right?" And he's like, "No,
Yeah.
the parts are too good."
I thought that was very sweet there. It's not doing anything.
It's not hurting anyone. If it's not doing anything, who cares, you know? Again,
it's a machine,
implying to us
it.
that society has broken if it's Chinese. I think they say maybe Indian, actually. I don't
the solar panels are Indian.
Maybe that's what it was like. Almost
he
like,
says they're really good.
The last time, we don't have Navy and Air Force anymore, so, you know, no one's using this thing. Let's strip it, you know? So back on the farm, we learn a bit about Merv talking about this ghost in her bedroom. And it's quite a good kind of moment because he actually says, you know, they sort of debate that, they're not a family that believe in ghosts. And so he actually says to her, you document it, you write it down, you report it, and then that way you can analyze what it actually is. Like a very scientific brain on it, isn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, and she's fully into it. She's got her notebook there, and she's been, taking notes, and she's trying to figure out whether there's Morse code, and that sort of thing, which happens a bit later on, I suppose. But
so then they have a moment that night or whatever. Very rural John Lithgow. I love this. John Lithgow and Matthew McConaughey having a beer out in the cornfield, basically, you know, on the porch, and it's a very thematic moment because they're just talking. But John Lithgow says that when he was a kid, there was 6 billion people on the planet, and so I guess that's giving you possibly a time element to us, isn't it? It's like he's you and me as an old man in a way, and he's saying that there's 6 billion people on the planet, and all those people wanted and had to have everything. And, you know, if you think about it, that's what we're like, aren't we? You know, in this world. And I actually think the coronavirus might be a way that we change that in a little bit. Like the idea that we all must have a car and a phone and a laptop and, you know, photos and the latest kitchen stuff. And, you know, like and clothes, too many clothes that you can't even wear. You know, it's consumerism gone crazy. And so I think, you know, it's interesting because he's kind of giving us a bit of a theme that there must have been a point in humanity, which is sort of like us now, where 6 billion people on the planet, and if they all want a piece of the pie, there's not enough. You know, like we've got to think about being more resourceful with our planet, don't we? We got to think about looking after our planet. We all have to cut back a little bit.
Well, I saw someone wrote a little piece. It was just sort of maybe a sentence or two, and it said, so you just think about the situation. We've ruined our economy because everyone's only buying what they need. And I thought that was kind of nice. And it sort of touched on what you're talking about there, is that if we all only, you know, buy or consume what we need, then suddenly there's this huge problem and everyone's falling apart. Yeah. Which... It's interesting, and that's obviously what's happened in this film. There's been crop failures and the Dust Bowl effect. They had the little chat. Yeah,
we go to the baseball match, and that's, you mentioned it before, that he says, you know, in my day, you know, we had baseball players that could play. Yeah. And then he's like, well, in my day, we fought over food. And, then, you know, like, so... There's a real sort of, again, historical, you're sort of seeing the timeline, aren't you? So for John Lithgow, there's baseball meant proper baseball, you know, the way we see professional sport. So again, John Lithgow's giving us a window back to the time before the conflict or before the famine or whatever happened. Whereas for Cooper, he's been born in a world like 30 years later, when the world is a shitstorm, I suppose.
And speaking of shitstorms, that's what happens. The baseball players suddenly stop and look up, and there's this great big dust cloud coming in and over. So everyone just sort of goes, oh, I guess the game's over, and they all stand up and pack up and go.
Yep.
And they get back to the farm, and this is the interesting thing here because they get in and there's dust sort of blowing around.
Yep.
And Coop says, "Oh, have we got all the windows closed?" And they look at Murph and he goes, "Well, my window." And they run up to her bedroom, which is where the ghost is, of course, slam the window shut, and they see these strange shadows in the dust that's floating down, and it's the dust is sort of piling up into set little grooves on the ground, which, of course, totally fascinates Coop because he's like, okay, there's maybe not a ghost here, but there's definitely something going on here. And he investigates it for a while, doesn't he? He flicks a coin in there, and he tells Murph to get a pillow because she's not going to be sleeping there tonight. And when she comes back in the morning, he's been, I guess he's probably been sitting there all night looking at this situation. And he says it's gravity. And he proves it by flicking a coin, and the coin, I think, sort of falls funny.
Yeah, it looks like it gets like slammed into it, doesn't it? Like gets sort of sucked into the piles of sand or whatever.
And it's not Morse code. He figures that it looks like a barcode, but it's binary, he says. Yeah. So he starts writing it down, and he goes, "It's numbers, coordinates."
Yeah.
Which is, it was nice that they brought that along quickly because a lot of times it takes a little while for them to figure out. They walk around for a while going, numbers, what could these numbers be? Why would there be numbers? You just get to the point. It's either a Bible reference or it's coordinates. Just,
See,
that's
to
all
me,
it ever is.
And to me, this is what I said at the start about the film explains science, but there is moments, you said there's moments they don't explain science, but you don't always have to explain the science too much, because then that kind of is a bit boring. Like, show me what this means, like get to the point. I mean, I in that scene, to be honest, when he said coordinates, I'm like, okay, like it's not what came into my mind, but all right, like I was thinking more, okay, it's a message. What's the message going to say? And he's going coordinates, and I'm like, okay, like I don't really care because I'm here to watch a movie, like I want to get to the good bit, so. Yeah, I agree. It was good that it was faster to get to that point. But I also think it proves that you don't always have to spell every little thing out,
No, and this movie, it skirts it back and forward a bit, I think. But he jumps in his car and tells everyone they've all got to stay home.
Yep.
And sends
Of course,
Murph off.
doesn't.
Murph doesn't want to.
So obvious.
He jumps in his car and drives off, and his son, ever dutiful, stays behind, but Murph is
he's a good
hidden
man,
away
his
underneath
son.
he's a bit of a nutcase towards the end, but that's okay. Murph is hidden under the blankets, and I think Coop was just a little bit secretly pleased that she came along. And it was like, oh, okay. Because in that school scene, we saw that Coop's son had been relegated to being a farmer because that's what he's going to be good at. And talking to him at the ball game, it's like, yeah, okay, I love being the farm. I love what you do. It's good. And Coop sort of dies a little bit inside when he goes, I don't want someone who's just going to settle down and be a farm. But fortunately, Murph is little daddy's little girl and wants to grow her brain and learn and discover. So I think he's pleased that she's jumped in the car with him.
Definitely, he is.
They drive off and they drive along for... I guess into the evening, so what must be, you imagine 6 hours or something.
Yeah.
And it could have been all day, I don't know.
Yeah.
Goodness knows. But it doesn't really matter too much, but they end up at this fence and he gets his bolt cutters out. And this is part of their world as well, is that in our day, you turn up and there's like a locked up fence. You don't just go, I'll just go cut the bolts and go in, because someone's bolted it for a reason and they're going to be on the other side and they're not going to be happy about you cutting your way in. But I get the feeling this world that they live in is far less inhabited. And a lot of the government infrastructure
I do
is
think
gone.
It probably, gave us a little bit more insight into them as characters, but didn't it? I mean, this is the thing. We didn't actually focus on that school scene when we've gone through it, but it was like at the school scene, he debated that idea of like the government changing the textbooks so that it was better for society not to look at the stars and get down to being farmers. But he debated that, and he if you remember, he comes out to the car and he says, "Oh, I got you suspended." Like she didn't get suspended on her own account. He encouraged the suspension. And it's like when they got to that gate, he's like, "Oh, there's a locked up gate. Damn it!" And she goes, "Don't we have bolt cutters?" I'm glad you agree with me. Because it was telling us, I think, even a bit more about Merv and him, that these guys. Yeah, they want to break the rules a bit, like it doesn't really matter that there's a locked fence. They're gonna open a locked fence, Whereas
They're
maybe
explorers.
you and me wouldn't. We'd go, oh damn it, it's locked. We probably shouldn't open it.
It's very cool then, because we've got this super bright light and this commanding voice telling them to back off or do whatever, and you're sort of worried that there's going to be guns involved. This voice screams yells into the car, very commandingly tells the little girl, "Do not be afraid." And that works so well with 10-year-olds. I've always thought.
Yeah, I know that. I think they would just scream, wouldn't they?
Yeah. Do not be afraid. I said stop being afraid. Yeah. So anyway,
I told you to stop being afraid. Damn it.
Murph gets taken, and so does Coop, and I think Coop wakes up.
He does.
So
he does.
He was tased or something, wasn't he? He got tasered. There was a little zapping sound. So he wakes up and there's this voice addressing him. And it took me a moment to realise it was that weird 1960s looked like a 1960s computer mainframe. There's this silvery box.
It was bizarre. Hey, as the film goes on, and these are the robots that they have, but far out, they are bizarre robots, aren't they? It's a totally different take on a robot, because it's just
I really loved it. It spoke to me of practicality.
Yeah, and I agree. Like I as I said, as the film went on and you saw more and more what it could do, they gave it attitude. They gave it humor. They gave it sympathy. They gave it a purpose, and they also showed some of the practicality that you just mentioned about it. I agree, but it was a bit which made sense, because we're just waking up like Cooper, and there's this thing, and I liked, he wakes up and he basically bags it for being a shit robot, and she even says
models are a bit dodgy.
Yeah, you can't always trust them, which is kind of interesting, because again, it's like that old cliche that we can't trust the robots. But so I think what was nice about that is it was quite abrupt of that, oh God, this is a robot that is it's interrogating him. It's powerful. You don't really know. And he's actually even saying, oh, look, these are shit robots. Like, again, it speaks to the society. And when Anne Hathaway comes in, and then she actually answers him by saying, well, it's all they could spare us. So you have to put up with this is as good as the robot we get now.
Yeah. And she's... Professor Brand.
Professor
and he
Brand
says, "Oh, I knew She says, I'm Amelia Brandt or something.
Yeah.
He says, "Oh, I knew a professor back at whatever, Professor Brand."
Yeah.
He says, "What makes you think I'm not one?"
Yep.
And you can see him sort of go, "Well, you're obviously not the professor I knew."
Yes.
Yeah. It was that little
Well, he says, he said, which is good for his character. He says, "Oh, he was far better looking than you." Because this is the thing. He's just kind of having a dig at everything, isn't he?
Yeah, so it's quite good though, and it gets taken off into this conference room full of serious-looking people, and there's the Professor Brand.
There's the old professor, played by Michael Caine. How good is Michael Caine? You got to love him. And good old Christopher Nolan
don't go
loves...
into the night, quietly into the night.
Yeah,
They
kept putting that in this film, didn't they? Do not creep quietly into the... But Michael Caine, Christopher Nolan, Michael Caine, he likes him. He's a little bit of a... I think the fact that he is British, Christopher Nolan, Michael Caine is a great British actor. He's in obviously the Batman series that Christopher Nolan did. And he's kept him in this film, hasn't he? Still there, sorry?
And, it seems to get very serious, and Coop's all worried that he covers Murph's ears and said, I need some assurance that we're going to get out of here and not in the boot of a car.
Yep.
And everyone around the table sort of looks a bit odd and goes, "What? Do you know who we are?" There's no, we're NASA.
We don't kill people.
Yeah, like, what do you think? We don't have goons. Yeah, so that's quite good.
Yeah, and from there we get this big sort of sequence of information, exposition, between Cooper and... It's Professor Brain, is it? Brand? Is that the right name for Michael Caine?
Yeah, it's quite a good, as you like to say, the Pope in the swimming pool.
Yeah, it was.
Because the wall opens up, as he's given exposition, the wall opens up, and there's these rocket thrusters.
Yes.
And immediately you're sort of going, what the hell is there? They're in a room next to rocket thrusters? Yeah. And they're walking around this thing, and there seem to be these greenhouses where they're studying the plants, and there's this spaceship. Yeah. And, so even though he's sitting there saying how, we sent out 12 it's the Lazarus missions, and we did, we get this whole backstory. Yeah. You're still fascinated by the fact there's a spaceship, and you're excited because you go, ooh, we're going to get a spaceship action. This isn't just theoretical sitting around the ground movie. This is one where they're going to get in a space. It's a good... it's called Interstellar, we know, but still.
Yeah, and it's a good sort of, like you say, it's the Pope in the pool. It's showing us, we've got a character filling us in with all these blanks, which makes sense because Cooper is totally in the dark, but they're visually showing us so much information to go to prove that, this isn't just theoretical. They're ready to go tomorrow. And I think he even there's a good line there because he even jokes like, but you didn't even know I was alive until, an hour ago. And then Michael Caine's like, well, that's right. Well, now you're the best option, like we didn't know you were an option before you showed up here, So I kind of like that.
I think that's that breakdown that they've had, that infrastructure is much poorer. The house is living out in the cornfields. It's like an old 1930s house. Yeah, there was no indication. He had a laptop, but there's no sort of indication of high connectivity. No. Yeah, there weren't flat screens about the place with Netflix showing, for example.
No, and so they go through that. They have this the information. They also say is like the plan. So the plan is that there's this anomaly showing up. It's a wormhole near Saturn. And the idea is that the plan is to go through the wormhole, and on the other side, they know for certain, because they've actually done this 10 years ago, is they sent off, was it 12 missions, I think? It was something like 12.
Yeah,
they sent off 12
there
missions.
Were 12.
And they've got their pictures on the wall of these brave people. They went to these planets, and their job was to try to communicate and send information back if the planet was any good. And a couple of them have managed to, ignite the beacon and send some information back to them. So now the plan is to send a ship to kind of re-establish humanity and make sure that then we can shift this whole big NASA station there. And then plan B, which Anne Hathaway reveals, is that if they can't get this NASA headquarters off the ground, and this is very I Am Mother. Did you find this? Like, they have all these embryos ready to go, and it was very clear, like, she was very clear about, she said, that I think was it like 300? They had thousands there, but like, there'll be 300 that would get the ball rolling, and then those 300 very quickly would then raise the thousands that were there, sort of idea.
Like, they incubate the first bunch for 10 years.
Yep.
But then within 30 years, they could have a colony of hundreds or something.
Yeah. And
I'm not sure exactly how they're going to do all that, but let's just roll with it.
But it was very I Am Mother, don't you think? Like that. I mean, I Am Mother's come after this film, but I straight away was like, oh wow, that's like the I Am Mother kind of setup in a way.
Except the robots in this would be these frightening refrigerator-looking things.
And then Murph. So there's a bit of a debate there of like, he's going to captain it. Should he do that? And he obviously does want to do it. And Murph is, she gets a message from the ghost at this point in time. And the message is, stay. And she doesn't want him to leave, and so...
But he just thinks that's made up and go. I mean, he had to go.
I mean, he had to. Yeah.
And it's just, you can't expect a 10-year-old, though, to accept that the world is coming to an end and there's sort of like this one long shot chance of some benefit.
Mm.
So he does go, and he leaves his son the car. His son seems to be taking a bit better, but as it turns out, he didn't. I don't know, he wasn't that keen on the whole deal. But
No.
so yeah, I mean, he goes off though, and he doesn't get to say a proper goodbye to his little daughter, which
No.
I think makes him quite upset. And they jump in their spaceship, and they're going to go, and Tars, the robot, makes a joke. Where was he? Says something about, yes, I'll need human slaves for my robot empire, or something funny. And
Yeah.
so they turn his humour setting down from 100% down to 90 to 75%. And they're asking about honesty. And he says at 90%, and he says, oh, is that really the best thing? And he points out, well, sometimes, for diplomatic reasons or for, safety, we need to not quite be 100% honest.
Yeah, and he says,
So, okay,
I think he says
90%.
something like, when dealing with emotional beings,
Yes,
meaning
when dealing with
humans,
emotional beings.
it's best not to be at 100%, There's some sort of
Yes.
line like that he says, so it's like, yeah, you don't always want to be honest, 100% honest.
Well, it's nice. It comes back later on when Cooper asks, is that 90% you don't think it'll work, or 10%? 90% you think it'll work, or 10% you think it'll work? Asking, are you saying it's going to work because you want us to feel good?
Yeah.
Or do you actually think that's the case?
So they
that's
take
quite
off from
funny.
planet Earth very traditionally, space sort of space rocket, that takes off. There's quite a impressive scene, isn't it? That we're in this cockpit. It's very logistical,
it's-
like a NASA taking off, like what
They've
we've
got the
seen.
multi-stage rocket
Yeah.
drops off behind them as they
it is
fly up.
it's Cooper, it's Anne Hathaway's character. There's the robot Tars. There's the Doctor character, and
This fellow
there's
David.
Yeah, I don't have
Character's
all
name.
those names actually in
So the
front of me.
character
Sorry.
name was David.
Yeah, and there's the navigator.
Oh, so
who-
Romilly. Romilly was David is the actor. Romilly and Doyle
right,
and
Yep.
Tars,
and good old
and
Tars.
they catch up with Case.
Yes, and they get out of Earth and they dock, and this is where he sort of takes over and flies the spaceship. You see that he's quite happy about that, and they dock at a big space station, which is a big circular thing, kind of looks like a bunch of sea containers all connected together in a very circular format, and they get on board that really quickly and very efficiently, don't they? And they basically. He starts flying that, and he's got to spin it, and you see that. I don't know. I remember they said something about G's. I didn't quite pick up, but it was going at a couple of G's, and of course that character, what was his name? He doesn't like it. He needs a drug, kind of like a
Romilly.
seasickness.
Romilly doesn't like it. He gets
Yeah.
motion sickness, so he takes
And
his.
it's 3.
Whatever.
They kind of emphasize that because he's like, oh, I'm not feeling well. How long is it to Saturn? 3 years. And so it's like, oh,
22
okay.
years. No, so 2 years.
2 years.
22 months.
Okay, so it's,
Yeah,
but still,
22
it's
months.
like, oh god, he's going to be seasick.
But they go
for-
in hypersleep for most of that. So
Yeah.
I think they were like 2 months flying out, and they did some video communications back where Coop doesn't hear from Murph, but manages to say goodbye to his son.
Yep.
And then they go to sleep, and 22 months later wake up coming into Saturn orbit.
Yep.
Where they receive the next lot of messages.
Yep.
Which again doesn't include Murph, so he's still a bit sad that he had this bad goodbye.
Yeah.
But I guess at the same time that this is where we see the wormhole.
Yeah.
They stop the spinning. We see this wormhole, which is this spherical thing, and this wormhole rendering took huge amounts of time to render. That was actually based off some real science. What do you call it? Space-time manifold equations, which was done in part as a research study at the same time. So I think they got some of their funding for their visual effects. Let me see. I was going to try and find this mention. I can't find the mention of it. But anyway, I think they got some of the funding for their special effects because they were using this computers to to render what had previously just been theoretical equations to come up with this spherical look. And as they approached it, as they went through the wormhole, they got a bit more creative, because what the hell's that going to look like? Nobody actually knows.
Yeah, that's right.
But it was quite good there. And they went through they go through the wormhole, and that's a bit of a 2001. In fact, the whole docking sequence and going into the space station was a bit of a 2001
Yeah,
thing.
I was going to leave that to later with the with the cinematography and stuff, but far out, there's a lot of 2001 in this movie.
Yeah, it's inevitable, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
Considering the plot. But they get out, and that's where they're in this new system where there's 3 candidate worlds, one that's close to them and 2 that are far away. The one that's close to them did get a good signal for a short time.
Yep.
I'm saying there was water and good atmosphere, but then it's not sending anymore.
Yep.
Like it's a repeating or something.
Yep.
And then there's the further ones. They've got they're still getting telemetry from Dr. Mann's planet, and the one further out, Edmund, that stopped. They got some good news, and then it stopped suddenly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they need to figure out which of these 3 planets they're going to go to, because they've got a limited amount of time and fuel and resources.
Definitely.
And this is where the first, I guess, the next nerdgasm comes in, where they start talking about this gargantua, which is a rapidly rotating black hole, which these planets are orbiting around. And this one that's close to it is actually within its gravity lensing effect.
Yep.
Which is where relativity, there's enough gravity basically to bring relativity into play. And they're saying that when you go down to the planet, every hour is like 7 years for someone who isn't on the planet.
Yes.
So they're really concerned that they're going to, basically waste a whole lot of time. They've got, I think they were originally thinking maybe they've got about 40 years of Earth before things will become really just too far gone on Earth.
Yeah.
So they've got to budget their time very carefully, and they come up with a...
Yeah, and I think, this is where, going back to sort of saying the caveman story for Cooper, when he hears this information, he's like, yeah, but hang on, if we go down there, every hour is 7 years, my daughter, she's already a couple of years older, and she's already pissed off with me. If I go down there for 7 years, she's going from being, I think she's maybe 10 at the start of the story or something like that, 10 or 12, and it's 10. Like, you can do the maths, can't you? If we go down there for a couple of hours, she's suddenly like a 30-year-old, so he's very concerned about that, I think, isn't it? It's that primal instinct of, I didn't really sign up for losing like 30 years of my daughter's life. Yeah,
but he comes up with a compromise where they'll orbit on the far side of the planet, and they'll just duck in and duck out.
Yeah.
He says.
Yeah.
Which, as it turns out, is not as simple as it seems.
No.
And this is a really cool sequence here where they come in through the clouds, and there's oceans and water, and it's a bit tense. You're coming in too fast. And it's very efficient.
Yeah.
And it's really cool because they come down. It looks like the whole place is just water.
Yeah.
And he puts down his landing gear and lands, and the water's only sort of calf deep.
Yeah.
But it extends just horizon to horizon.
Yeah.
From where they are, it extends out to the mountains in the distance, which, as we learn, they find the beacon, and the ship has been crashed, and that's not mountains.
Yeah,
it's enormous.
It's a great
world.
moment, isn't it? Because TARS, it's like we're sort of, it's that good old. The beacon is here. We're on top of the beacon, but they're walking in knee deep with the water, as you said, and TARS then lifts up the beacon and it's wreckage, and it's like, then they sort of notice parts of the wreckage, and they're like, it's off, part is off near that mountain, and that's when the realization that, well, hang on a minute, that's not a mountain, it's a wave.
Yeah, we've just got these sort of mountain-sized waves traveling around this whole planet, which is, I guess, the tidal effects of being near a black hole. Isn't it? So there's that race where she just wants to get the data. She's so desperate to get that data, and then there's a race back, and poor old Doyle doesn't quite make it because he does that cinematography thing, that movie thing where it's like, quickly jump in, and instead of just jumping in and slamming the door shut, he pauses, slowly looks up at the enormous wave that's coming over him, and he just gazes at it for like about 5 seconds. And he's like, okay, well, you deserve to die now. That's just the way it is. Sorry.
Yeah.
Your survival instinct did not kick in. And yeah, so he loses it. They manage to just slam it shut. And they go surfing on this wave. The ship goes up like a big mountain, and it comes flying down the other side, and the engines get flooded. And so they put their landing gear back down. They've got to wait for it to drain. But there's another big wave coming. And they blast out they put their helmets on and blast the cockpit oxygen air out through the engines.
Yeah.
And fire up, and they just
managed to
escape.
get enough.
But they've been delayed by a few hours because they've had to wait for the engines and all sorts of things. And I think there's around then when they say, I don't get it. How come we were receiving this message? And she says, Brand says, well, because of the time dilation, she'd probably only been, the doctor, the scientist who landed there, had probably only landed a couple of hours ago and had probably just died minutes before they arrived. Mm. And that's kind of a mind, fuck there, where you sort of think, you're like, by the time you arrived, this crash had only just happened, which is a bit strange. And they come on out and they connect up to the station, and they're worried because, of course, they've spent a bit longer down on the planet than they expected. And poor old Romilly is up in the station still, and he comes out looking a little bit dazed and in his pajamas, I think.
And he's a bit older. He's got a beard. And
yeah, they find out they've been gone for 23 years.
Yeah.
And he'd learned all he could from the black hole and spent a few stretches sleeping and things, but yeah, basically he was kind of a bit... Yeah, I think he took it quite well, all things considered.
Yeah, he was a bit, I kind of thought, I think instantly, because Cooper's, upset and all this, because you're thinking, his daughters and son is 23 years older, but, I did really think about Romilly, because, far out, he's been on that little ship on his own for 23 years, and he did say that he slept a couple of periods, and he obviously spent a long time observing the black hole, which was probably really his kind of thing, but you're just like, wow, being alone for 23 years,
Yeah, it's a pretty harsh sort of thing. And this is the reality of this sort of space travel, and particularly when you're dealing with, I guess if you were traveling close to the speed of light, or in this case you're very close to a deep gravity well, that you end up with these strange differences in time. And they realise now that they've spent too much fuel and too much time, and they've still got 2 planets to check out. And I thought this is a really good scene here where they're debating. They're saying, well, one of the planets is closer, but it doesn't look good, but it does have a beacon saying everything's okay. Yeah. The other one has got much better telemetry. The data from it sounds far more promising, but it cut off very quickly. Yeah. We don't know if that's what that means. Yep. It's also further away, so if you go to the one that's further away thinking it's better, then you may not have and it turns out to be rubbish. They're not going to have the ability to come back again. And this is where Brand has her little monologue about love and the connection that humans have, transcending space and time. That even though this Edmund is probably dead, that she still really feels that that's where they should go.
Yeah,
and
she
Cooper,
talks about, that's where a theme in the film is coming up, isn't it? Because she's talking about the fact that she is in love, and this person may even be dead, but the fact she's in love with this person, she she's really got that urge to go. And it's the same later with Matt Damon saying, you know, a human has that survival instinct versus a robot. Well, the survival instinct a human will do weird things to survive, you know, whereas a robot won't. So, and they joke about that. I just suddenly connected that, you know, they do joke about with the robot, you know, like sending the robot off on a self-destruction or, you know, a mission that he's probably going to destroy or die on. And the robot goes, I have to do what you tell me to do, you know, like, so it's like, they don't have that same autonomy that a human does, do they?
No.
So they also here, this is where Cooper's notified that, well, in those 23 years, there's a bunch of messages that he can watch. So he sits down, and I mean, this is where it's the impact. It's really nice that they decided to do it like this, I think. And I mean, being a father myself, and you might have had this experience. I mean, I don't know if I would have had the same experience, maybe if I actually had seen this in 2014, you know, with just 1-2-year-old. But now that I've got 3 kids, I found that scene quite powerful because, yeah, like you think he's only been down on that freaking planet for a couple of hours, but 23 Earth years have gone by, and then here are these messages, you know, and the messages, like the first video is Tom the way we know it as well as an audience, like he's the teenage boy, and he's talking about taking a girl to the dance, you know, or something like that, or liking a girl, and then it cuts to the next video, he's holding up a baby, you know, he's like, oh, this is your new you know, and then in the next video, he's kind of like talking about the farm and the world and whether there's any point in making these videos. You know, you've been gone so long, and you do really think about that, don't you? I mean, especially I think as a father, again, that's that real primal instinct of the film.
It was around about here that Pip was bawling her eyes out. I heard a little noise, and I looked across, and she was crying. And I have to say, I was surprised at my own reaction, because I thought it was only after I heard Pip, my wife, for anyone listening, having a bit of a cry at these videos, and I still looked back and thought, I didn't think of them as being emotional.
Yeah,
that's a strange. It was just like a strange, because often, yeah, these sorts of things do sort of, you know, get me right in the feels, as it were. But this one, I don't know why. I just wasn't thinking of that. I was probably still thinking about the about time dilation.
Yeah,
and
you were
wormholes.
too excited by that. I knew you'd be excited by that. It'd be tickling your little funny bone away. But yeah, for me, for us normal people, Surrey, I didn't cry, and I do cry. Movies do make me cry sometimes, but it didn't go that far. But you know, I did. I mean, straight away for me, and I think again, this works when you're a parent, and this is a very parent moment, because I don't know about you, have these moments where you think far out, you know, like I can tell you, like with my 3-year-old, there's times I'm just like, oh fuck, I wish she was a bit older, and then immediately you're thinking, but if I wish she's older, you know what I mean? Like that's it, she's no longer this age. And as soon as your children grow up a little bit more, and you know this from the age of your kids now,
I notice that with
you go,
with
well,
my
they're
daughters.
never ever going to be a 2-year-old again. And there's bad to that. There's definitely bad, because a 2-year-old is a 2-year-old, you know, but then you go, fuck me, they're never going to be 2 again, are they? Like, you're never going to have, like, I've even had these moments recently where I've thought, a friend had a newborn, and I'm like, oh my God, a newborn is so hard. But then I thought, I'm never going to really have a newborn again. You know, you're never going to actually hold my newborn. You know what I mean? Like, you might, as you get older, you might hold a friend's newborn, or my kids might have babies and I'm a grandparent, but it's never going to be yours again, is it? You know, you're never going to have that experience.
I noticed that with Ivy. She's now kind of a bit big to pick up.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's just growing so fast. And every now and then she asks, can you pick me up? And I'm like, I'm going to hurt myself.
Yeah.
it's just the reality of it, because I really want to. I want to like hoik her up and throw her around like I used to, but
and I'm the same.
Last time I did that, I just about did my back in, because she's like 3/4 my size now. So
and I'm the same with Walt. Like,
work.
I feel for him, because I remember being a kid and my dad going, I can't pick, you know, like, I'm not picking you up, but I'm going to pick your younger siblings up. And there's that moment as a kid where you're like, I want to be picked up. And I've seen that, like, because Walt said, pick me up, like, because I've twirled the other kids. And then I've gone, if I twirl you, I'm going to do my back in. I'm not doing that. Like I can't do my back in, you know? So it's definitely, and you see that. Like,
I literally did do that when I was at the beach. You know, I was throwing Elliot in the water because he's still quite little, and Ivy threw me, and I'm just throwing her and throwing her. And the next day, oh Jesus, my back all down. I was just, I was thinking, gee, that was close call. If I'd been a bit more vigorous, I might have actually done something a bit dangerous there.
Yes. Anyway, we diverge, but there is a very, and I will say, I think as a filmic technique, it was very clever that you might have picked up on this, Surrey, as well, but the video is playing and we do see a snippet of video, but then we have this really long, slow zoom tracking shot in on Matthew McConaughey. And I got to say, as an actor, he did this really brilliantly, that like he's laughing and we sort of, you know, Tom's talking about taking the girl to liking a girl, and he, you know, blah, blah. And then it cuts to the next one. He goes, oh, this is your grandson. And then we're kind of tracking it and he's laughing, but then the laughing turns to crying, and the crying goes from more like, you know, I mean, sometimes people cry because they're happy. It sort of is a bit of a happy cry to like a really, then he kind of starts sobbing a bit. And it's such a long, you know, tracking zoom kind of feature in onto Matthew McConaughey Cooper. And, I thought it was a really brilliant way, because it didn't really matter to us as an audience what was on that video. It was his reaction to that, you know?
Yeah, and I think it was a good way of just reminding us what the stakes were. So
that's
like,
right. That's a really good point.
What he'd given up this, you know, seeing his son come, and he still hasn't received any messages from Murph.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden there is a Murph message, isn't there?
Right at the very end, when we think that it's all over, she pops on. I think he was just about to turn it off. Like he sort of grabbed the thing and went, and then it comes on with Murph, and she's an adult. And like there's this woman that we can only assume is Murph, and she explains that his father-in-law, John Lithgow's character, had died and was being buried, you know, next to where his his wife was. And
no, that's Tom says all that.
Tom was there. So what does she say?
She just sends him. She sends him a really nasty message. She's like, I've never done any of these things. It's my birthday. Yeah.
And this was the birthday where you said that when you came back, you might be the same age as me. I'm the same age as you now.
You got it, bro.
You better come back home. You know, it'd be really good if you came back home right now.
Yep. And you're not here. You've let me down. I'm going to go be a stripper because my dad hates me. You know, that whole normal cliche. That's what she says to him. It's a
NASA stripper.
Yeah, she's a very, it's a very nasty daughter to father message. That's what I like. Literally in my notes, I was like, Murph sends him a nasty message, because it was. And the good thing from there, it kind of transitioned, and we see what Murph does, like that she's working at NASA, and
it's a good little segue in there.
It was,
because we don't feel like we were jerked out of it. It was similar to, I guess, the start where they went from being this documentary and became less documentary, and then it became just the movie. And he's done the same here. It's like message, and I think even while she's giving the messages a voiceover, it's showing her working in NASA. And then the voiceover goes away, and then we're just left with her doing her thing back on Earth.
Yeah, and it cuts from her to then the ranch. And I mean, we didn't pick on it in this because it's a minor thing, but very early in the film, Cooper and John Lithgow and that, they talk about one of the neighbours burning the crops because they didn't work out. And in this moment, going from Murph's video, it goes from Murph's video, her nasty message, and then it's back on the family ranch, and Tom and that, they're burning their crop. So it's kind of like in the time that Cooper's been away, which is quite a long time now, 23 years, like it felt like at the start of the film, the neighbours burning their crop because they're not doing a good enough job. But then it's like, we're really desperate here. We're now burning our crop. It's not turning out. It's not working.
I think that's it. They're burning a third. They've lost another third of their
Yeah.
farm. And he says, and if this sort of keeps up, I'm going to have to take over so-and-so's farm. And there's that question, well, what's he doing?
Yeah.
And Tom, that's his name, isn't it?
Yeah, Tom, the brother,
just kind of is quiet and doesn't answer, and goes on.
And the dust,
so you assume
the dust seems worse, like it's worse than what we had seen earlier in the film.
Well, we get little young Coop Jr.
Coughing up a lung.
Yeah, coughing up a bit of something, and
Jeez,
there's a
Dad,
concerned
what's wrong
look.
with my lungs? Yo, Dad,
There's a concerned
my lungs
look.
are coughing. Yeah, they're not in a good state, are they?
And we do get a bit of that relationship now between Murph and Dr. Professor Brand working on the gravity problem.
Yeah.
And they're trying to work through this equations a bit circular, and they think they might have a bit of a breakthrough here and there, but we don't really get any resolution.
And he's complained to being an old man, but I mean, like, straight away I'm thinking, geez, you've had a long time to work on this. I mean, honestly, if you'd still not figured it out,
Yeah, honestly, I would have figured it out.
Yeah, no, you would have. Bloody put you on the job, definitely. But
yeah.
Anyway, in this bit here, they have a moment. He does say about, you probably remembered the exact line, but he does say about, what does he say? It's about the gravity that kind of sets her off a little bit, doesn't it? It's there's a moment there. He says,
it's not old age. It's my enemy. It's time.
It's time.
I'm a physicist. Time is my enemy.
Time is my, and so that sort of sets her off. She starts thinking about the equation a bit differently. And anyway, then he is dying in the hospital, and she rocks up to his sort of deathbed, and he basically reveals to her that there is no way, like, to get off the planet. There's no way to get off planet Earth, and it's, it's not right. And she kind of asks him, and he starts doing that frickin' poem again, doesn't he? Do not go into
frustrating.
I mean, that's his last dying words. Do not go into the night.
He says, he does say that we're missing, like, it's circular, it doesn't resolve itself, we're missing the information, and unfortunately that's in the middle of the singularity of the black hole. Yeah. And there's no way of getting information out of that.
And so she realizes, and this is a great, I mean, to me, I don't know the exact moment in the film, the time. I mean, it's a 3-hour movie, it's really long, but I feel like that's probably almost, maybe it's after the midpoint, but it's a really perfect, I would see that as quite a good midpoint, because it's like, you're telling me that they've been working on this equation to save humanity. They've sent this spaceship off into space that has had this disaster of losing 23 years of time, but then it's revealed in this moment that, in fact, they sent those people off in the spaceship, and it's a bit of a sham that they're going off to try to solve which planet's the best planet to bring humanity, but humanity can't go there. There's no way to get humanity there.
Yeah, no, they're just trying to keep everyone busy.
Yes, and which, of course, connects back to us, that, in fact, that we've been following Cooper's journey, that it's like, the whole point is at some point Cooper's going to get back to Murph. But here, no, it's pretty much saying, well, no, he's not going to get back. He's never going to get back, because that was never the plan. The plan isn't for him to come back. The plan is for him to find a new planet to impregnate with the human species.
Yeah. It's a bit grim, and I think that they take a little while to grapple with that, but they do head off to
the new
man. And I think
they don't know. They don't know. We know that as an audience.
Yeah, but they don't know that. Yeah, but I was just thinking that Cooper basically says they should go to Man and not go to Edward.
Yeah, they have that discussion about. Well, they've already had that, but they've decided. She says to him, Anne Hathaway says. Remember, she says, if it turns out that this planet's wrong, you then have to make the decision to kind of go to the next planet instead of going back to Earth. And we'll see. Yeah. I can't remember the exact line, but she's basically saying to him, you're picking on me for being personal right now. You better not choose to go back to Earth for your daughter. because that will be on you then, you know?
Yeah.
So they decide to go to Dr. Man. They go to Dr. Man, and they come in on the planet that's frozen. Remember, it's like a frozen cloud. The spaceship clips. Its
Yeah, I
wing
love that. It
clips
hits the cloud, and the cloud's frozen. There's
Yeah.
bits of ice particles come off.
And
it's not
funny
very
because
promising.
he goes, it's quite funny because he goes, frozen cloud, and they just kind of all look at each other, you know?
But it's nice here. They find Man, and that's
Matt Damon. I'm Matt Damon.
Matt Damon. Yeah, which is
I can't, thank you, South Park. I can never, ever
Matt
freaking
Damon.
get past. I'm Matt Damon.
And
He's so
the funny
good,
thing
Matt
is,
Damon, in so many good movies, but it's like whenever he comes into a movie, I can't help but do the Trey Parker, Matt Stone, I'm Matt Parker. I'm Matt Damon.
but the funny thing is, of course, that they've got Matt Damon, and he's just playing like a relatively small part in this whole thing.
Yeah, he is.
So that went and shelled out the cash for Matt Damon, who would be able to pull people to his movies just by his name.
Yeah.
But he's not even on the starring list or anything. It's just an what as, which I found funny. But
just on a side note, sorry, the movie does that a few times. The farmer that when he's an adult, Tom, who is not a big role either. It's a small role. That's Casey Affleck, Ben Affleck's brother, who's been in lots of big Hollywood movies. He's quite a good actor as well, and that's a pretty small role as well for him. The Doctor as well is Topher Grace, from that 70s show, and he plays Venom. And he's been in about 80 different movies as well. I
was trying to remember where I recognised him from. Spider-Man 3.
Spider-Man 3, he plays Venom, yeah. But it's he's been in a whole bunch of stuff. Some of it is lead. I mean, recently, if you look him up on IMDb, maybe the last 5 or so years haven't been the greatest. So maybe when he did this, he's not an A-grade an A grade in terms of Hollywood, status. But, you think about him, even John Lithgow, we were talking about earlier, he's in the film and he just dies. You don't actually even see the death. You don't see anything else about him, do you? Michael Caine is dead by the middle of the movie. These are all really big actors that could just lead films, and they all play minor roles, don't they?
Yeah, well, I mean, having said that, Matt does a stellar job as Man. He comes out and he's telling them how he's so pleased to see them and so good, and he's making up all this bullshit about once you get down below this ice layer here, there is a surface, and the atmosphere changes and it's all a lot better, and you do get the feeling that he's talking a bit fast, and his robot Kip is dismantled, and he's just like don't worry about him. And
he got infected,
and sure enough, the Man takes Coop off to show him the descent site, so they can actually get some more readings, and Tars is bringing in the other ship. I can't remember what it's called, the lander, which has got the embryo growth capacity on it, or whatever that is, the chamber or something.
Yeah, well, they come up with a plan, don't they? Because, like you said, Dr. Man has said, well, look, it's crappy here, it's cold, whatever, and the hours are long, it's a 67-hour day, it's a 67-hour night or something like that. But if you go down to the surface, it's, manageable and blah, blah, blah. So they come up with a plan because Cooper wants to go back home. So Cooper's like, we'll spend the next day, getting you sorted, bringing the planet down, getting the babies going, all that kind of stuff. And then I'm out of here. And with that, Dr. Man says he wants to take him off to... I wasn't 100% sure why he took him off, actually. I'm not sure if they explained that or not, but he's like, I've got to take you off
to
show...
to view the site and have a look at the everything under this frozen
wasteland sort of thing,
shell that they're on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that's where
did get a
he
bit
does
confused
this.
by that bit, but that was fine. He works off and he admits, Dr. Man admits his planet has nothing.
Yeah, well, it's this nice little monologue there that he goes on about, survival instinct, and as a father, you would, the last thing that you're going to see when you die is your children, and that's going to spur you on. So that's why it's good to send you on here. And he's basically sort of making a case to try and explain away his actions, to say, well, I just want to survive, and so I am doing everything I can to think of to survive. And they have a fight, and we're thinking that Coop's going to die because he's had his face mask, cracked.
Yeah. And evil Matt Damon.
Yeah, Matt Damon gets back to the Ranger and jumps in just as Coop gets a communicator and says, "Hey, pick me up," and they pick him up, and there's a chase into orbit, and Tars points out that he disconnected the auto docker, and it's a different setup. So man, it's got very little chance of being able to dock. And so they're trying to warn him, don't do it. But he's like, yeah, no, whatever. And he tries. And he
keeps
clumsily
trying.
Bumps. He does a pretty good job. I mean,
yeah.
let's face it, considering it's years different technology and a good 10 years after the Lazarus missions. So it's different technologies. It doesn't have the automated systems and it's by himself. He almost gets it done. He presses the button to open the door and blasts out some of the atmosphere, and that knocks the ship to the side, which kaboom, knocks it all off course. And it was a very cool space chase, like the old trying to get a hold of the runaway train. The stagecoach is running up next to it, and the horses, and they jump off onto the train, and they've got to get up the end of the train and pull the brakes. And it's the same sort of thing here. They chase after this spiraling space station as it descends ever closer to the frozen atmosphere of this planet. But thankfully, they managed to do it. And in doing so, they discover they have precious little fuel left. In fact, they don't have... I think the idea is they've got enough fuel that they can do a close swing by the black hole to give them a bit of a boost out to the distant planet. And while they're going to do that, they're going to drop off Tars, who will fall into the black hole and try to send back this mysterious quantum data, because who is it? The Murph has managed to get in touch and tell them that there was no plan A. And the only chance is that plan A can't be solved. They can't solve this gravity equation because they don't have information from the black hole.
No, that's right.
Yeah. And so that's the plan then. And there's a bit of a confrontation there where Brand is confronted to say, you knew this all along? And she said, no, I had no clue. And you get the feeling that indeed she'd had no idea either. So her dad had been lying to her.
She was sort of a bit too, you kind of implied that she probably knew, but then she was just way too upset about her father. It seemed like she was quite upset emotionally.
I have a feeling that it was a case that she had guessed.
Yeah.
Because her dad had been working on this thing for a long time and hadn't made any progress. And so she probably had a suspicion that meant there was no solution.
Yeah.
But I think she was running on a bit of hope, and also this thought that she'd be able to get with her boyfriend, Edmund.
I thought that was quite good because, for a pretty big chunk of the movie, Brand had been pretty cold. She's pretty sterile. There was that mention really early that she was 100% honest when even the robot was saying you shouldn't be 100% honest, and she was pretty cold as a person. So in that moment, suddenly she was quite emotional, realizing that this truth of that it was a sham, that that her father had kind of lied to them, that in fact they were just kind of going to spread humanity and not so much try to find something for everyone, It felt quite convincing to me, actually.
Yeah, I really did get the feeling that she wasn't in on the lie.
On the lie, yeah.
Just maybe that she wasn't too surprised, I guess, would be more the way I'd put it. So they're going to do this plan. And as we always know, the plan that they outline is always exactly the one they're going to do, and it always works.
Yeah. Yep.
So they go flying off, and they hit the gravity well, and they start boosting. They've got TARS in the Ranger.
Yeah, I think so.
And Coop in the other one.
Yep. And they're going to slingshot around.
Thrusting.
This good old slingshot move. It's used a lot, isn't it, Surrey, in sci-fi?
It's a beloved maneuver.
It
works particularly well with rotating black holes.
I've kind of not kept watching it completely, but the comedy show Avenue 5, it's a science fiction show about it's basically like a cruise ship, but in space that, things go horribly wrong and they get stuck in space because they miss the turn-off. The cruise should go for a couple of months in space, and they stuff it up, and it's going to go for years now. And that's one of the episodes they talk about this. They're like, oh, we'll just do a slingshot around Saturn's moon or something like that and get the cruise ship back to Earth. And of course it fails. It's just, I always think about that. Like, so in this movie, when they said slingshot, I'm like, oh yeah, I don't think it's going to work.
One thing I like about this slingshot maneuver they do, though, is that nice bit of foreshadowing that we saw at the start where they launched from their rocket.
Yeah.
And it was a 3-stage rocket, so the first stage disappeared off the back.
Yep.
And then the second stage dropped off. And so in this one here, they're firing their rockets to sort of keep out. And then Tarz's ship runs out of fuel and says, well, off I go. And he ejects, and we see his ship fall away backwards.
Yeah, I liked that too, I must admit, yeah.
And then, of course, when Coops runs out of fuel, and then he says, well, Newton's third law, to go forward, you've got to leave something behind. And he pulls it and flies back. And that's, I sort of noticed, I noticed this, symmetry? Was that this, indeed, moving forward, they're leaving stuff behind. And so he falls backwards into the black hole.
Yeah.
Which, one thing I noticed is, it was about the 30 minutes left of the film.
Yeah.
Half an hour left. And you're thinking, well, geez, he's just dropped into a black hole. I don't know how they're going to fill half an hour now of him falling into a black hole.
Yeah.
But they manage it because this is where we get the next 2001 sort of
well and truly
thing happening, where he goes into this, because we're entering fantasy space at this point, where you pass through the event horizon, which they say would work because it was rotating fast enough or something rather funny.
They kind of had the science behind that, as if like you went fast enough along the line, you would bypass that bit. I'm happy to go with this, people. Just tell me some science. I'm okay. I'm all right with it. I'm not like Surrey. I'm okay.
I don't entirely understand.
I don't need to know
why it going faster would work. I would have thought going slower, but anyway,
it doesn't bother me.
It's not really the point. The point is that it would be theoretically possible, and it makes a lot of sense because the hyper intelligent multidimensional beings that set this whole situation up, they knew that this was what was going to have to happen.
That's right.
So they would have, maybe they had some way of creating a little tunnel through the event horizon to allow him to fall through safely. It's sort of unimportant at this point, because through it he goes and he ejects because his spaceship is screwing up, and he falls into this really interesting grid, 3-dimensional sort of grid structure, which at first doesn't make a lot of sense, but then he goes up to it and you realise it's the bookshelf.
Yeah.
And he's somehow getting this representation, and Tars explains it, which is good, because up until that point I'm sort of looking and going, how is this? He's in the bookshelf? What? But then Tars, he says, no, actually this is a 3-dimensional representation of 4-dimensional space.
Yeah.
It's been constructed so that you can make sense of what's going on. They can't pinpoint or interact through the time because they're these multidimensional beings.
Yeah.
They don't have the sensory capabilities, but and this is the revelation that Cooper has, is that I'm the interface, I'm the message or the messenger, I'm the one who's going to do this. And so he sees his daughter, he has a bit of an emotional journey as he goes through time and tries to convince himself to stay, and then finally he gets frustrated and he realizes that he's not the one, he's not the message, it's his daughter who is the whole point of all of this.
Yeah, there's a really magical, there's a magical moment there, isn't there, of him which I quite like because it's a father. Again, it's like a father theme because early in the film he says it as well, where his dead wife had said to him, what's the word? He says, "You're not there. You will be there for your kids. You will be your kids' memories."
Yeah, so, you're not their future.
To me, as a writer, I'm just going to segment this a little bit to writing. There's a really magical moment in this film, in that moment, because film or story, we follow the protagonist. This film, the protagonist is Cooper, but in that moment, which is quite symbolic of this whole three-dimensional time warping, gravity doesn't exist, whatever the fuck we want to talk about, but there's a magical, it's almost like they're breaking the storytelling rule, because in that moment for Cooper, he still has to do things to solve the story, but it's almost like he's actually realizing, I'm not the hero of this story, my daughter is the hero.
It's like he's passing the torch on, he's going,
yeah.
Okay, I'm not actually supposed to be solving anything here.
No.
I'm just supposed to equip my child with the tools to move into the future, which is, like I said, it sort of gives you a bit of goosebumps as a parent, where you sort of think, just the number of times I've thought back about an encounter I've had with my kids, and I think, oh, what terrible scars have I just left? What
there's scars every day from me, from my kids. Don't you worry.
Oh my God, what awful habits or attitudes have I just imprinted on them? Because they just look at you and they just go. But anyway, so he's in the bookshelf there, and I guess it sort of he does imprint, because he wants himself to stay. He taps out the stay, and he kind of imprints his urgency to stay on Murph, wanting him to stay, and that's why she's a bit upset. Anyway, finally he goes, the watch. The watch is just going to be left on the bench on the bookshelf, and he'll encode Morse code the answer that TARS is detecting. We don't know what the answer is, but there's information that TARS is
it's just the pure information of being through the black hole, isn't it? It's the answer to the gravity situation.
And that is that nice bit there where it says, how do you know that the watch is going to be there? How do you know she's going to pick it up or whatever? And he says, I know because I gave it to her.
Yeah.
And sure enough, she comes back and picks up the watch and sees the hands ticking and runs downstairs. And there's this confrontation with her brother. Her brother had been really grumpy about them, and he was clearly very disillusioned with the entire situation. And instead of having this fight, she just runs up and hugs him and says, look, it's all okay.
It's always been Dad, Yeah.
Yeah, Dad's always been with us. It's going to be good.
Yeah.
And we get old Dad. He's up there and he goes, yes, I feel satisfied that I've done that. And he sort of sits there, and TARS says, oh, well, they seem to think you've done what is needed. They're dismantling the tesseract.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to I'm going to put that word somewhere in something I write one day. It's like the tesseract. It's just sort of,
and it's cool visually, isn't it? Because it's like, I mean, I wrote when I was, again, this is the first, I've just watched it once for this tonight, and I haven't seen it before, but it was cool because he'd completed that, and you're right, TARS is saying that, and it starts I mean, I'd written down, like, it's like he's falling, at the start of this whole sequence, it's like he's falling down an elevator chute. And of course, then he stops and then realizes it's the bookcase. And there's that moment that he kind of, when he's realizing, we just talked about, I'm not the hero, I have to impart just information for my daughter, who's the real hero. And so it's like he kind of swims through all the rooms, like he's kind of But I loved this when the world, you know, like at the top of this grid elevator chute thing that he's in, it just starts folding in on itself, and it's like getting brighter and brighter because it's collapsing in on itself towards his spacesuit. And there's a beautiful shot there where it's just the reflection of his spacesuit, you know, the mask over his face. And he's quite content, and you can just see the reflection of that moment folding in on itself. And I mean, you think, well, he might just be dead after this, because again, we have no idea how anyone survives going through a wormhole or anything.
Well, this is the proof of Brand's theory of the love and connection, as opposed to man's theory of continuous survival instinct, because he's facing his death, and yes, he's thinking of his children, but he's not thinking of them that he's going to survive for them. He's thinking that he's done the right thing by them. Yeah, which is a different. You know, it's not. He's lost that desperation. Yeah. He's reached some sort of level of acceptance.
Yeah, contentment over
luckily,
it. Yeah.
And I do like the ending of this movie, that he gets picked up by the spaceships at the end.
Yeah, so he's floating in space, isn't he, after this experience? And he gets picked up.
It's because it would have been easy enough just to end the movie there. And I think they could have done that as an alternate ending. But I do like the bow being tied on this one, where he's picked up and he wakes up, and first thing he sees when he walks over, he sees a baseball game. And again, they're not skilled professional players. But this time it hits the ball and it shoots up and smashes the window, like, and they're all like on about it. And we see that, yeah, he's in some sort of big cylindrical space station. And
this person takes him like a tour guide back to his house, but it's back to those documentary videos all through it. So it's his house is a museum, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I like also that thing. It's Cooper Station.
Yeah.
He goes, oh, you named it after me. No, sorry. We named it after your daughter. She's the one who saved the world.
She's the important one, not you.
Yeah. Because, of course, as far as anyone on Earth knows except for her, he just flew off and never came, and just reappeared 124 years later or whatever it is. 80 years later or something.
Yeah.
So, yeah, as far as anyone's concerned, he's not done anything. But, yeah, it's really nice. He meets up with Murph, finally gets to see her, catch up with her. And you do get the feeling that she did have a full life. She wasn't left,
she's kind of dying. Sad. And they do say she shouldn't be here, but when she heard that they'd found him, she had to come.
She'd be like 90-something years old.
Yeah, she's in a bed and she's not doing well, but her family surrounds her, and it's children and grandchildren and, you know, aunties. You know, it's a massive amount of people. And he kind of walks in and they have a moment. But she actually tells him, you know, she says to him, there's nothing... A parent should never see a child die, which is a very cliche move. So she actually says to him, you don't have to watch me die. I've got all my children here. They can watch me die, basically. Yeah. And so he leaves. He says, like, she kind of gives him permission.
Yeah. What am I going to do? And it's like, well, Brand. Go to Brand.
What about Brand, you know?
So, yeah. So he does it, and that's really nice. He goes off, he fixes Tars up, because Tars is a pretty cool character.
Yeah.
I liked him. There's... The shape and the way he moved kind of really grew on me. When I first saw him, I thought, he looks quite sort of awkward and 1960s-esque.
No, by that end, you know, it's like, you know, they're just hopping in. They're hopping in a very Top Gun plane at the end, aren't they? It's a very, like...
Yeah, it does. It's very sleek
ride. It's not just a NASA shuttle. It's a very kind of slick thing that they're hopping in. And Tars in particular, he hops in flat, but then he, like, hovers, a couple of beams up that makes him a bit more human, I think, like it kind of gives him a bit more personality.
And they rush off, and we cut to Brand, who's found, made a little tombstone for her partner, husband, boyfriend. I don't know what their relationship was.
Yeah.
And she's starting to set stuff up, and I sort of found that funny, as no one else thought to go check on her.
No.
So he's appeared back out of this wormhole alive.
Yep.
They didn't think, oh, I wonder if, this 100 years or whatever that's passed, we never once thought to go through and have a look.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but anyway, off he goes. So he's going to go off, and I don't know what time he is relative to her, though, because he went through the black hole and the wormhole. But anyway, I guess it ends there,
maybe even what you're saying there, like, are they on the same timeline? I didn't even think about this actually when I finished the movie last night. Are they on the same as Brand, and like what you're just saying, that the fact that maybe so his daughter has solved the equation, at the age of, in her 30s, 50 years has gone past, so now they're on this station Cooper. Yeah, like, are they still on the same time, or is he? So he hasn't aged, but he is 124 years old or whatever.
I think the impression that you get is that they're going to be at the same age.
Him and Brand are going to be at the same age. Yeah, so, but that's what I'm just saying. So that idea of, like, no one's thought to go through the wormhole to get. Is that because of that kind of? Oh, I don't know. That now is confusing me.
Who knows?
Hang on a minute. Hang on. Slow down. Slow down.
But I did like that ending. Often it can be overdone, like having this sort of happy style ending. But I think it was nice, and I felt satisfied by it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a happy enough ending because it's like he most likely gets to Brand, and then not that they necessarily had a relationship, but maybe in this new world.
But he always wants to be the pioneer, the explorer.
Yeah.
He wants to break new ground, and sitting, and cause I think he makes that comment to Tars or someone or other when he's sitting on his reconstructed ranch having a sip of beer. You're like, I can't remember what he says. There's something along those lines. I'm not just going to sit here doing nothing, going back like it was before.
He says something like, I never put much weight into looking into the past or whatever, because they've reconstructed his past, haven't they? A museum, they've reconstructed his house and everything, and now they're like, oh, you've come back, you can just live in your old house. He's like, this doesn't really do it for me. I'm not really interested in the past. I'm only interested in the future. And I think that's why when he does get back to Murph in the next scene, and she's kind of like, I love you, Dad. Like, I've always, this is important that we've reconnected, but you don't need to hang here. You can live your kind of future,
Yeah. Yeah, and so that's good. I do like this ending, that it was a nice ending. But that's the wrap up of the movie.
Yeah, and we've done pretty well there, sorry, because it is a 3-hour movie.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot to it. We skipped through a fair number of parts there with little flurries. What about some sort of a ladder positioning?
Yeah,
because you were saying before we started recording this that you're tossing up. You weren't sure if this was like a really a sort of a great and significant movie, or if it was merely a competent and well-made science fiction movie. Which, and I can see where that comes from. What were your thoughts about that? Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think in terms of the ladder specifically, this does need to come in kind of like about number 4 on my ladder. Like it needs to come in high, because from a filmic point of view, from a story point of view, it's very well done. Like there's a lot that is very, very good in this movie. And it does, I think, tick a lot of the it ticks a lot of the boxes that says, this is a science fiction movie, this is going on. And it does, I mean, again, as a film person, I woke up this morning thinking about this movie. I was debating in my mind whether I thought, is this a really great movie, or is this just a really good, is this a really great movie, or is this just like a really good science fiction movie? Like, have they just done everything right? And to be honest, I still can't
become a future classic? Will people look back on this as being some sort of defining film, or will it just be, another good Christopher Nolan film?
Yeah, and I mean, I do. I mean, unfortunately, it is one of those things that we know he makes. Look, personally, he makes some great movies. I still go back to Memento. Like, I love Memento. And I think that's his first feature film. Maybe second. I'm not too sure. Like, he might have made a little kind of India version first, but Memento is just. Some people don't like Memento. I freaking love that movie. It's not science fictional, but that is such a clever movie. Jonathan wrote that with him. They both wrote it, the same as this film, and it's based on a short film, and then and then they made the feature film. I love it, and that was his big introduction as well to, the US movie system and stuff. So. And then you go through, like, The Dark Knight I think The Dark Knight is such a good film. Inception.
That one's great. It was a really well delivered dynamic between the good guy and the bad guy. And it made the Joker make sense to me. Like, previous Batman films with the Joker, it still seemed a bit too comic book. In that, there's just kind of that childish, he's mad. And you go, that doesn't matter. Whereas The Dark Knight, he was just crazy, but it said that he had a philosophy to his madness. He wasn't just a criminal for the sake of being a criminal. He was trying to teach the world to be better.
And especially Batman, like he's basically there as the that perfect, again, you talk about writing and stuff, like he's that perfect example of the antithesis, like the opposite of Batman, so in The Dark Knight, the Joker is just, like that's what he even says to him in I don't want to spoil it, but in the climax of that movie is kind of, the Joker is saying to Batman, murder me, because then you are me, like it's like, kill me, like ruthlessly kill me, because you are so much more stronger and powerful than me. I am rubbing you up the wrong way, but right now you have that choice to be the hero or to not be the hero. You can be like me, and that's extremely good. But I mean, that whole Batman series that Nolan did, I think, it's the best Batman movies that are out there. Then you take something like Inception, Memento. These are really great films. And Interstellar, like, I'd never seen it, and I'd always wanted to see it, and it's stuck with me. I watched it last night, so it's almost 24 hours later, and I know we're talking about it, but all day I've kind of thought about it, and that's a really good thing. As someone that wants to be a filmmaker, that's what I want people to do with my films long term. Is I want them to walk away and think about my movies the next day, the day after, a week later. You don't just want to be a flash in the pan. You want people thinking about your stuff, don't you? So whether this, I can't quite put my finger on whether I think this movie is like going to be a classic in 100 years, but like 2001, 50 years later, it's still a classic. Like you've got to sit down and you still watch 2001, and there's so much good about it. You and I talked about with 2001 did people think that at the time? And so that's always a good question, isn't it? Like in Interstellar, will our kids grow up and go, I wonder what it was like when Interstellar came out at the movies, Like, will it be like that? Or is it just going to be Christopher Nolan's sci-fi movie? Or is it just going to be like, oh, it was a really good sci-fi, but, not the classic that we're talking about. But in terms of how much, the good things in it, I mean, filmic wise, story wise, it's an extremely enjoyable movie. So on the ladder, I'm going to put it in there on my fourth rung, I think.
Yeah, well, I'm going to go in a bit lower down that because I was looking at the top four there, where I've got, I was thinking, so I've gone down at number 8.
Yeah.
And it's possible, like I said, like it could grow on me. I had that same feeling that it's this really competent storytelling moments in there, like the way the opening scene starts, and I don't think I've seen a movie done quite as well. There's sort of Saving Private Ryan kind of starts with that documentary sort of feel,
yeah,
with the old people remembering and then going in. But I think this one, it just kind of, it mixed in enough sort of features, and he did it twice. So he did it there, whereas the documentary then becomes a film, and then he did it where the message from Murph becomes Murph back on Earth doing her thing, Murph on Earth, as they say.
Murph on Earth. So
that was really well done. There's some really nice sort of symmetry and foreshadowing. What do you call it? I learned a new term, semiotic isotopy.
Oh,
it's just the
hello.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one. It's it's a kind of like foreshadowing, but it's a symmetry of meaning, but with slightly different language usage.
With using symbols, yeah.
It's like the launch sequence leaving Earth, dropping stuff off at Earth, then the sequence where they're trying to escape the black hole, but they're having to sacrifice things to the black hole. So it's similar. It's not quite foreshadowing, but you've got this similar meaning happening, but with a different.
And they do say, don't they? They kind of mention that quote a couple of times, like the only way to go forward is to leave something behind.
Yeah, so it's quite a nice, like, it's just those sorts of features really, that does show a lot of forethought and skill. Like, it's hard to incorporate such nice balance in a story, because you've got to think of it for starters. Yeah. And there's so many things to think of when you're doing story and plot, trying to make this scene play off against this scene and have this theme running through it all, but not trying to make it like you're being punched in the face with it.
Yeah, obvious.
And there's so much sort of going on that if you can actually pull some of this stuff off like he has in Interstellar, it shows a definite skill, and that in itself is quite impressive, I think. So, but I think maybe I also get that feeling that I've kind of seen, and it could just be because we have watched a lot of sci-fi end to end now. But, I've sort of seen parts of this in 2001. I've seen parts of it in The Beyond and, like Passengers, even with the sleeping and time shift and type stuff. So I sort of feel as if maybe if I hadn't watched all of those other movies, this would be higher on my ladder.
Mm.
But because I've seen all these other movies first, it's sort of like it's a really competently done story using many of the elements of many other science fiction. So does that mean, like you said, does that make it great, or does that just make it just a very well done science fiction film as opposed to a truly great one? I don't know, but there you go, 8 it is.
Mm-hmm.
Just sort of and that's that might shift after we watch a couple more movies. I might shift that along.
I did find that myself, that perfect point you're saying, that I'm a little unsure, because you and I have watched specifically certain science fiction films for Spacebrains, and I'm unsure whether other people would have that same experience, and I'm sure a lot of people went out there and watched this film because it was Christopher Nolan, coming off the Batman series, coming off Inception, very popular, successful Hollywood films. He built a name for himself, and even for this particular example, if you Google this, his brother suggested him, and he negotiated his director's fee, and apparently it was $20 million or 20% of the gross of the film. Now, the film ended up making $650 million plus. So, you know, this is a guy that is super competent, super intelligent, knows filmmaking. You know, he's blazed his way through, you know, coming from England and British cinema into the American, you know, Hollywood system. You know, he's dictating his own path, basically. And to make a science fiction film like that, that's extremely popular, big box office success. And I just wonder that then, therefore, the general population that maybe, you know, they watch a couple of science fiction films in a year, but they don't watch science fiction like you and I do. It just felt like some of the moments in this film did repeat things that we've seen in other science fiction films. That's not necessarily a bad thing, because that's the genre, you know, that is, you have to have those moments. But am I seeing anything super different to other films? No. But am I seeing it done really well? Yes. So that's where there's, in my mind, it's a real struggle to kind of say, oh, is this really outstanding, or is it just been done really well, but I've seen it before? You know, like, it's a bizarre question, isn't it? I've never really thought of it like that.
Yeah, it's a strange question to ask. Is it just really well done, or is it extraordinarily done?
Yeah,
I don't know.
And we can't put our finger on it. So there you go. Let us know what you think. Are you one of these people that you've just stumbled across Spacebrains and you're like, Interstellar is the best? What are these guys talking about? Let us know. Or, yeah, you've been following along. I know a couple of you listeners out there personally have reached out to me, and you're following every damn movie that we are doing. Like, what do you think? Did you have the same experience? You know, did you watch The Beyond? Did you watch Passengers? You know, did you watch even After Earth, the Will Smith movie? You know, like, some of those moments are in this film, and especially, and I want to come back to this a little bit later. I know we've already been talking for a while here, but I want to get to 2001. Like, we talked a lot about that. How does this film compare to those films? You know, let us know. Hit us up on the socials or the website. I'd love to know what your opinion is of that. So, sorry. We've talked about the ladder there. What about the science? What do you want to pick on?
Oh, the gravity question.
The gravity question, of course. You must be able to answer
I love gravity. And
who doesn't?
The simple reason for that is gravity represents the failure of all of our fantastic scientific, you know, astrophysical and cosmological knowledge. Gravity is the one thing, more than anything else, that says you've got it wrong. And this is why I think they must have been talking about when, in this movie, they're talking about the problem of gravity. And so, in a nutshell, you've got quantum theory and general relativity. General relativity is Einstein.
Okay.
So he took a lot of stuff that Newton and that lot were doing, and he came forward and made it a little bit richer and brought it down to deal with atoms and photons and stuff. So he was looking at what are the fundamental forces in the world, and how do they interact and how do they relate.
Okay.
And so he worked in with, he's not the only person, he worked in with a bunch of other very smart people around the turn of the 20th century. 1912 he published his theory of general relativity, and we know this from the important equation, the E equals mc squared, which relates the speed of light to matter and energy, and the way they're all sort of interrelated. And by having the speed of light, that brings into play time. And speed, you've also then got movement through space. So he's talking about the fact that space, time, energy, and matter are all related. And when you're looking at gravity under this model, what you're talking about is space-time, which is, you know, height, width, breadth, and, you know, that's your 3 dimensions. And then you've got time, which is your 4th dimension, forms a continuous field of existence within which matter and energy operate.
Okay.
And when you get energy, which, as we know, because energy is equal to mass times the speed of light, energy and matter are in many ways similar in this field. When it moves through space-time, it distorts it. So the more energy you have, or the more mass, the more it distorts.
Right.
And this is where you get, like, planets will have gravity. So this distortion of space-time, because you have such things as, like, the speed of light is constant, you get these an emergent effect. You basically get things will move in towards one another. It's gravity. And so general relativity is about continuous space. There's no division. You can think of it as like a smooth plane, and people always talk about the old rubber sheet with weights on it representing space-time being and the way gravity could be represented. But quantum mechanics deals with the very smallest things. So we're talking about electrons and protons and neutrons and the quarks which make those things. And it's not a continuous system. So its fields are divisible down to quanta, which are the smallest units. And the one that we're all familiar with is the photon. The photon is like the indivisible unit of energy that transfers electromagnetic force. So when you've got an atom, you've got an electron spinning around it, and you heat it up, you add some energy into it, the electron will move out a shell, if you remember your chemistry and so on.
Okay.
It'll move up a level, and when it cools down, it'll drop down a level, and it will release a photon, which is a bit of light. So the colours you see, for example, are atoms absorbing electrons and then giving them back off again. And that absorption and release is done on a photon level, which means you can't, which is the quanta of electromagnetic force. So you can't divide that down into a smooth continuum. It's either you've got it or you don't. And so the electron is either at one level or at a higher level. And when it gets hit by a photon, it'll jump discontinuously by the amount of the photon. General relativity would say that it should travel through space-time doing that. But quantum mechanics, all the mathematics and the observations and measurements they've done of that show that that's not the case. So you immediately now have this conflict between general relativity, which says space-time is this smooth, continuous membrane which permeates everything, and then quantum mechanics which says, well, no, because when an electron is hit by a photon, it jumps without concern for moving smoothly through space-time. Why this is important then to gravity is that must mean then that gravity affects particles with mass. But at the quantum level, it kind of doesn't, because gravity doesn't operate in quanta, as it were. There's no photon equivalent for gravity. There's no graviton. But we do have a Higgs boson, which is the quanta for mass, but nothing for gravity.
Right.
And gravity is also orders of magnitude weaker than what it would do if you were to say it did have a quanta and it worked under quantum mechanics. So gravity is the problem, is that you cannot have gravity operating in the general relativity and gravity operating in quantum.
Right.
It's incompatible. Like your mathematical equations fall apart, they fail. And why this is important for black holes, as in this movie, is because a black hole singularity is where space-time is compressed due to gravity down to, or due to mass, I should say, which produces gravity, down to below the Planck length. So the Planck length is the smallest measurement you can make. If you try to go smaller than that, the amount of energy required to measure, to create a a measurement particle, like a photon. So you want to shine a beam on a light at something so you can look at it. The amount of energy you've got to put into it basically means you're going to end up with a black hole.
Yeah, right.
So you can't get it. So it's hidden. As soon as you get to the wavelength required to actually examine something accurately, you can no longer examine it. So inside this black hole, where you've got space-time collapsing down to an infinitesimal point, down to the quantum level, you've now got gravity and space-time trying to operate at quantum level, which we don't have any way of understanding how that can possibly happen. There's lots of different sort of weird theories. There's string theory, and there's multiple universe theories, and there's a number of other sort of 17-dimensional theories and so forth, which are trying to come up with ways. But just like it says in this movie, ultimately, what's happening inside the singularity is the answer to what gravity actually is. Now, I don't know how that helps them fly a spaceship, but certainly that is, gravity is one of the most fascinating things, because it's not as powerful as it should be. Like the other three forces, the electromagnetic force is, solar radiation and magnetic fields and so forth. And you've got the weak atomic force, which holds atoms together, and the strong nuclear force, which holds neutrons and protons and stuff together. They're way, way stronger than gravity, just by the fact that the sun is hugely massive and has a lot of gravity.
Yeah.
But light still, it just escapes from it and flies away. It takes, a collapsed neutron star black hole to stop light from escaping. But even then, Hawking radiation is escaping. So gravity should be a lot stronger than it actually is. So where is the rest of gravity? And what actually is it? What is it? So it is an absolutely fascinating thing, particularly because we're standing here on Earth and we are under the effect of gravity all the time. And so we kind of think that we know about it, but it doesn't compute when you start dealing with high energy levels or very small spaces. And that is that. And I don't pretend to really understand all of that too well, but every time I get an opportunity to read a new article about it or watch, there's some really nice videos on YouTube talking about it, then I take that opportunity, because you can bet that's where the next major physics breakthrough is going to be, is the gravity problem.
Definitely.
Again, I don't know how that's going to help us fly a spaceship, but it could.
It could.
It could. You never know. You might be able to fire some lasers at a particular exotic particle in a certain way and manufacture gravity waves or something. I don't know.
I think so. Why not?
Why not? Well, there's no particular reason.
No, I don't think so. Give it a go.
We don't have enough energy, I guess, at the moment, but we will do. But anyway, there we go. So Interstellar, they dropped into this huge black hole and managed to, TARS was able to record and measure this answer, which could be encoded as Morse code, apparently, whatever that means.
Yeah, definitely.
But so you want to talk about the 2001-ness of this movie?
I want to wrap that into, and I'm conscious that we're talking, but I do want to wrap that into the sort of technicalities part. I mean, so technicalities talking about filmmaking, sound, lighting, color, symbols, editing. I mean, we've touched a bit on a few things, but I want to kind of recapture or come back around to a couple of parts. And I mean, the first thing is thinking about I mean, again, I think that's probably why I'm thinking about, is this a great film, or is it just a good film, or is this sort of something that's going to be iconic in the long term? I'm unsure, sorry, to be honest. I can't quite put my finger on it. But I will say, as someone, and look, go back, listen to our Space Brains episode about 2001. I've always been a big fan of 2001 by Stanley Kubrick. This film, I mean, there's a few things you can Google this, and it's actually a common Google search, so I'm not the only one thinking about it. But there's so much about this film, you know, the story. Then we can break it down into some of the cinematography. You mentioned before the docking, you know, the docking moments between the shuttle and the station, and it happens a couple of times in this film. Even the sound when they dock is kind of a bit of a symphony that's going on. There's also the fourth dimension going through the black hole, and I suppose I could kind of, you can almost summarize the whole narrative of this film. Like, is it a prequel of 2001, or is it just a homage of 2001? And I know Nolan has said you can't really make a space movie without it being somehow connected to 2001. And I understand what he's saying, but to me, it almost, I mean, I can see so much of this film, like, yeah, connecting to 2001. However, I think he really does take, you know, if you are someone that believes he's pretty much made a prequel of 2001, or like an extension of 2001 is another way, I suppose, of thinking about it. He's kind of done a much more standard narrative version of it. So if you remember in 2001, you know, we have things like starting with the dawn of man, fast forwarding through future. We have the killer robot, HAL 9000. We have the spacemen going out and experiencing possibly a black hole. Whereas, and we have no freaking idea really what happens to him, because at the end of 2001, we suddenly, sorry, spoiler, but suddenly in 2001, so please stop, but in 2001, you know, he goes through the black hole and he awakens, if you remember, in that kind of old European styled apartment, and the feeling is someone else is there, but it's kind of him jumping through the rest of his life, isn't it? Like in 10 or 20 year increments. And then when he ends up, you presumably dying, suddenly there's this massive fetus, human fetus over Earth, isn't there? And that's the end of the movie. So it does, 2001 asks you so many more questions than Interstellar does. Like, Interstellar answers all of those questions. It doesn't leave you wondering in that way. Where it left me wondering is like kind of going, oh, is this a great film? Is it a good film? Wow, he did some really cool things. Yeah, it's connected to, I can see so many connections to 2001. You know, is this actually very different to the other science fiction films we looked at? No, but then it's done really well. He's explained things.
Some of the special effects technology borrowed,
yeah,
or re-envisaged from 2001.
They're definitely re-envisited, yeah.
Some of it was because in 2001 was the first usage of that back projection.
Yeah.
So rather than just being green screening, the actors would act against a back projection.
Yeah.
Which was then masked. And this one here, they did a lot of the scenes. They did the computer generation. And then use that similar thing. So it was computer-generated imagery they were acting against, but they could see it on the wall behind them, basically.
So, yeah, it's possibly more realistic for the actors, yeah. I don't know. So, but to me, there's so many, you know, like, you've also even, in 2001, you've got the killer robot, HAL 9000, sorry, getting a bit tired, HAL 9000, but then you've also, in Interstellar, you've got TARS, who's like then a helpful robot, you know, like, so it's the opposite. Yeah,
I don't know. Similar aesthetic, has that same sort of 60s.
Yeah, But I've got to
blocky
say, like,
aesthetic.
and you and I have talked about this, like in 2001, there's a 5-minute docking of the space shuttle, docking into the space station. Nolan doesn't do anything like that because I think you would just turn off the modern day audience. But when there's that clamping scene early in the film, where they first get to the space station, there's definitely an emphasis of the clamping moment. And then later in the film, when Dr. Mann, Matt Damon, is trying to do it, I mean, how many times do we see the shot, the clamps are trying to jump on, but they don't join? And then it even moves a bit and it comes back, doesn't it? Like, there's definitely emphasis of that, whereas we've seen other modern day films, they kind of bypass that bit. Even if it's a tense moment, they bypass showing us too much of that. So I think there's definitely a connection there. But the other thing, so I think 2001, he's paying a lot of homage to it, or he's taken a lot of inspiration, which I don't blame him, because as I said, as a filmmaker myself, I think 2001 is sensational. Like, it's really up there. It blows your mind. And please listen to our podcast about that and let us know what you think. So that's one thing. The second thing I really want to pick on is, like, this film's really well made. The soundtrack, this is me nerding out. I actually listened to a bit of Hans Zimmer. And so even though I haven't seen this film, I've heard Hans Zimmer's song, which is played a fair bit in this film for Interstellar. He created it. That is a beautiful song. I know there's a few memes out there about this song online, but it's a really beautiful soundtrack song that Hans has come up with, as Hans always does. Cinematography is spot on. It's really well constructed. The overall narrative, which we've talked about, is very sensationally, intertwined between this father and daughter. It's very primal, even though it's such a complex, traveling through time, gravity is important. Will humanity survive? There's a twist that, in fact, you were sent out there and you never were supposed to come back. The fact that the story also progresses over her life it's not an easy thing to sell. I don't think that's an easy thing to sell to mass audiences, yet they succeeded in this version. It's a nice, tightly shot film. Even though it is very long, it's really well edited together. Like, it's very concise. What I want to pick on a bit is the symbols, and even the opening shot of this film is a bookcase. So it's the bookcase, and I don't know if you remember, Surrey, but it goes for about maybe 10 to 20 seconds, and it's a kind of a tracking shot along the bookcase. All those books are important to do with space or time travel, and so again, there's Nolan giving the audience a little opportunity to think about that. But even in that shot, he tracks from a bit of a futuristic looking space shuttle to the very traditional NASA space shuttle. And on top of that, there's like this grainy dust filtering over the top of it. So, like far out in the first 15 to 20 second shot, and then it says Interstellar and it cuts to the documentary. So, like, very quickly, he's given us a very visual symbol of the film. As I said, like other signs in the film that, is that we have the robot TARS. Well, TARS is, if you just reorder that's star. It's obvious that the robot's supposed to be helpful. It's a helpful robot in the stars. There's also the fact that he's I've just drawn a little blank on another symbol, but the fact that Dr. Mann, so Matt Damon, is kind of a sign that he's a symbol of hope, when in fact in reality he's not hopeful. He's about survivalists, and you're gonna work your way through it. You're not necessarily just relying on hope. You have to survive in the harshest of conditions. There's the poem that Michael Caine's character keeps stating. And so on one side, it's about going into the dark, exploring the dark, humanity going into the night. But then the way that Nolan uses it in the film is we have a motif happening. So we have him saying it, and then we cut. So he keeps talking as a voiceover, and we cut to the scene that we want. And that happens 3 times in the film, because it goes from he does it twice and then Murph does it once. So, as a technique, it's like constantly telling us that message, over and over again. Also, even Cooper, he symbolizes this idea of, stretching ourselves, that you don't exist in the one time frame, that you exist in the past, the present, and the future as humanity. Like, we're always evolving. That's what humans do. That's why we're the top of the food chain. I personally think, like, we're constantly thinking and evolving and changing and moving. And, the way that humans have gotten to the humans that you and I are is that we killed off all the past, the old version of humans, And that just tells you something about the way humans work. I don't mean we go out and murder people, but we're constantly evolving. We're constantly changing. We're constantly pushing the barrier. And again, even this whole coronavirus, like, you wouldn't have thought that this is how we would react to it, and we have reacted like this, and we've done a very interesting thing to try to save ourselves, really save the species. So, Interstellar, to me, like, it's there were so many moments, and there's other moments in the film, even just very small moments, that the symbols are there. The guy's on the porch drinking the beer, the fact that he's got the pickup truck, the way he is with Murph when she's a little girl, the books on the bookshelf spelling out a word. Like, there's symbols within the story that are very obvious, and there's symbols that are a bit deeper. And I mean, it takes me back to film school. We used to look at these films, and these classic films, and you go, the signs and the symbols, and looking for things like that. And in fact, this film has got them embedded in them, and that's always a really, it's like a little treasure hunt for people that like film. And again, I think it makes the film really good. So that's something that I really wanted to pick on with the technicalities, is the 2001 connection, and also the symbols in particular. What did you think?
Yeah, I guess what I was sort of saying there earlier about the way we've gone from documentary into film, and from message into the story that's happening on Earth. And as you said, these symbols, these things are really quite difficult to do, and to do well. I've certainly had my efforts where I'm planning what I'm writing. I go, okay, I've got to remember that this is going to be the case, and I've got to remember that I want the weather to almost be the opposite of what the emotional tone of this chapter is going to be. So I want, the weather is going to be hot and dry, and the emotional tone is going to be sort of sad and dreary. Or it's a wet thunderstorm, it's going to be, a hot, happy, passionate sort of moment. It's really hard to get that, squeeze that in to remember, and to do it so you're not just sort of, punching someone in the face with symbology, or with, flashbacks or foreshadowing,
Yeah.
And I'm always impressed when I watch a movie and you sort of, that it's done well when it's kind of more like you're looking back, you see something happen, you go, oh, hang on, and you think back to some earlier point in the film, and you go, was that connection there? Is it something I should? And then like a third thing will happen in the film, which makes up this, almost like a background story, a sub story that's happening, and it might even just be the sub story of the way the dust storms increase at the same time as the relationship between father and daughter changes. Those sorts of things that you don't, if it's done right, you're not going, oh, this is so clearly a whatever. It's more the case is later on, you look back at previous things, you go, oh, hang on, I'm starting to see that pattern. You're looking backwards on it, and you go, "Hey, that's really good."
Well,
you feel a bit more of a connection with the film and what's being told.
Yeah, and actually, just everything you're saying there, and I didn't bring it up. I've just in my mind, I've just kind of seen it. It's like even the documentary footage of the old people talking about it, and so we have them at the start, and we don't really understand why we're seeing that as an audience, but it's given us exposition of where the story starts. But it's also then when we see it at the end, we realize that that's where it belongs in the time frame. Like, it didn't belong at the start, it belongs at the end. So there's kind of a that's why we saw that footage. It was foreshadowing, the end, the museum.
Success.
So there's an actual story connection there, isn't there? Like, there's a story okay, now we get it. But on top of that, when you think about the whole thing about Cooper is basically saying at the end, and he says it even at the start, at the start he's saying, John Lithgow says, I feel sorry for you because you don't fit into this world and you didn't fit into the previous world. And then at the end,
40 years too soon,
you're
40 years too late.
soon and 40 years too late. And then at the end, when he is sitting on the porch, he's like, I never really had a thing for looking back at the past. So it's like the documentary, that's what documentaries are. They look at the past quite often, like they're reflecting on the past. So there's a symbolism there, isn't there? There's a symbolism of documentary reflecting on the past. It's used in the story to tell us stuff about the story.
And he's literally sitting in the recreation of his farmhouse filled with documentaries playing about his past.
So this is what I mean, sorry about it. Oh, is this a really great movie? or is it a good movie?
I think what we can agree on, though, is that Christopher Nolan and I guess his brother Jonathan, who wrote this, they've done a great job of working in so many things. And the direction work was really good. There was some very interesting camera work. There was the action scene on the water planet was very tense.
Yeah,
and the build up to man's betrayal felt reasoned because he had this monologue. There was so much skill going into that. It takes a lot of effort, because I'm sure there's a lot of directors and writers who think of these things, but kind of forget to or fail to put it in there, and then they kind of look and go, it'll have to do.
Yeah,
because I'm not sure, I've run out of time or energy or whatever. But he's managed to get it in there, and that's something I could only have. I guess I can hope to be able to do that with my own work.
I agree.
Is to be able to not just, because I can think of all sorts of symbols and ideas and this, as I said, the semiotic isotopy. That's the newest thing you got to think of now. I can think of those, but then when you actually have your story and your plot and you're working, you often forget, or you think about how am I going to fit that in afterwards? Where do I make this symmetry? Where do I do these things? And often you'll just sort of go like, it's good enough as it is. It's too hard.
Yeah.
And in this movie and a lot of these sort of great movies that we've looked at, either taking the time or they put the effort in, they've done it, and it's quite good.
Definitely. And I was just going to say on that slightly, and then we'll finish up, but it's like there's a lot of scenes in this film that there is little surprises, I suppose, for the audience. So I'm just talking about the narrative now overall, that, at the start, we're a little unsure, like the documentary thing, and then at the end we realize, that's where it belongs. So it's like a little present for the audience for sticking with the story. But then, so what I also mean is like the story of Murph growing, it's kind of a nice surprise that the stuff she talked about as a child, like the ghost stuff, is actually the father stuff. So there's kind of a nice surprise for sticking with the story. Also, like the fact that Michael Caine's character, Professor Brand, it was a sham, so that was a nice surprise. And then again, as an audience, we learn that, but Cooper doesn't know that until he lands on the planet and then Brand gets that message. You know what I mean? There's a delay for him. So again, as an audience, we learn stuff before the characters. So the surprise is nice. The fact that when Dr. Mann takes Cooper out, I don't know about you, but I didn't expect that he was going to kill him, you know, that he wanted to try to kill him. You know, that was a real twist, you know. Again, it was like, oh, you know, like Dr. Mann was saying there's all this good stuff. Okay, like in my mind, I'm like, yeah, how all I was thinking about is how does Cooper get back to his daughter? And all of a sudden now the stakes are raised. You know, there was a surprise that Mann wanted to kill him. And then even, yeah, like at the end, like, there was that major, you mentioned it before, that surprise of they were burning the brother's crops so she could have time in the bedroom. And then I thought the brother and that they were going to have a real physical standoff, and she just hugs him. And it was a very, like, it actually felt like it was a real big surprise because I was expecting like a fight. And she hugs him and she goes, yeah, Dad was here all along. He was talking to me all along, you know, like, there's a real candid moment. And again, that was another surprise. So, yeah, I've just thought of that as you were saying, that last thing you were saying, that suddenly there was a film that was, the narrative was full of a lot of surprises for me, the audience, I think.
Indeed. And as we wrap up, I was going to mention there's a new film by Christopher Nolan coming out, written and directed by Christopher Nolan. It's supposed to be due out in July 17 this year. We'll see if it meets that deadline.
Yeah, well, because I mean, cinemas are closed,
it's a future,
so it's a bit weird, isn't it?
Sorry, it's a science fiction film, Tenet, and it also has Michael Caine.
Yeah, he loves a bit of Michael Caine.
So Michael Caine is in the Dark Knight trilogy.
Yeah.
Is in the Interstellar and in Tenet.
Yes.
So it's also got Kenneth Branagh.
Definitely. Look, we'll keep a chat. So, I mean, yeah, let us know what you thought about Interstellar. I myself had never had a chance to watch this film over the last 6 years, so it was very enjoyable to sit and finally watch it, and whether it met my expectations or not, and this idea of, you know, Christopher Nolan makes great films. Is this a great film? So let us know what you thought about the film Interstellar, or also what we have talked about tonight. So you can hit us up on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, the website. You can find us on all of them. Just Google Spacebrains, or I think we are Spacebrains Podcast at Facebook and Instagram. And it is Gravity...
Spacebrains Pod at Twitter.
Yep. And it is Gravity Undone. And
I have to say we're going to have a short hiatus coming up for a couple of episodes worth.
Yeah.
Before we come back.
Probably just a couple of week break in between the next couple of episodes. Nothing too big, but yeah, we'll just have a little breather over this Easter period and everything that's going on, but we will be back very shortly. And that will be for episode 30, which will be a classic. And what classic are we going to look at this time, sorry?
Total Recall.
Oh.
Another Arnold Schwarzenegger science fiction movie.
Yes, this is a good one. Not the remake. Please follow us along and watch the Arnold Schwarzenegger original.
Otherwise, it won't make any sense to you at all what we're talking about.
No.
Because the remake is set on Earth with robots, and the Arnie one is set on Mars with mutants. So
is it, Surrey? Or is it?
Or is it? Ooh. Who knows? Okay.
So that is us for tonight. Let us know what you think, and we will see you next time on Spacebrains. Bye.